Yo, what's up everyone? It's Watch Harry, and today we're checking out Lucifer Morningstar claimed Harry as his ward at trial and Dumbledore's magic collapsed in seconds. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1. The courtroom. The Ministry of Magic smelled like secrets and old paperwork, which Harry thought was probably appropriate for a place that spent most of its time pretending things weren't happening. He sat in a hard wooden chair outside courtroom 5 on level 10, his hands folded in his lap, his trainers not quite touching the floor. The chair was sized for adults. Most things in the wizarding world, he was learning, were sized for adults and their concerns, with children fitted in wherever there was leftover space. A wizard in plum robes had walked past him 3 times in the last 20 minutes without making eye contact once. A witch carrying a stack of folders so tall she had to peer around them had almost stepped on his foot and not apologized. Harry was used to being invisible. He'd had 11 years of practice. It was the 3rd week of July. He'd been back at the Dursleys for less than a fortnight after his first year at Hogwarts before the owl arrived, not a Hogwarts owl, not Hedwig, but a stiff-legged ministry bird with a scroll attached to its leg and an air of bureaucratic self-importance. The scroll had informed him, in language so dense it took 3 readings, that a formal review of guardianship and welfare had been scheduled for July 21 at 9 o'clock in the morning, that his presence was required, and that failure to attend would result in a determination being made in absentia. He'd had to look up in absentia in the Dursleys' dictionary. Uncle Vernon had watched him do it with the particular expression of a man who was building toward a speech and hadn't yet decided which flavor of angry to be. The speech had never come, as it turned out, because a second owl had arrived 20 minutes later carrying a letter for Uncle Vernon specifically, and whatever was in that letter had turned Vernon Dursley the color of old cheese and made him very quietly say that Harry would be taken to London on the 21st, no arguments, early start. Harry had spent 2 weeks wondering what could possibly be in a letter that would do that to Uncle Vernon. Now he sat outside courtroom 5 and watched ministry witches and wizards move through the corridor and tried not to think too hard about what was about to happen to him. He was good at not thinking about things. That was another skill he'd spent 11 years acquiring. The door to his left opened and Professor Dumbledore stepped out, his half-moon glasses catching the torchlight, his expression carrying that specific quality of warm certainty that Harry had come to recognize, the look that said everything was already decided and the deciding had been done for everyone's benefit. Harry. Dumbledore's voice was the same as always, gentle and immovable at once, like a very old river. They're nearly ready for us. How are you feeling? Fine, sir. Good, good. The headmaster settled into the chair beside him, which somehow looked comfortable the moment he sat in it. I want you to know that what happens in that room today is largely a formality. The ministry has certain procedures it must follow regarding the guardianship of children in unique circumstances. We will answer their questions, confirm the current arrangements are satisfactory, and you'll be back with your aunt and uncle by this afternoon. Harry looked at him. What if I don't want to go back? Dumbledore's expression didn't change, exactly, but something behind his eyes made a small adjustment. The protections in place at your aunt and uncle's home are, I know about the protections. Harry had heard this speech. He could probably give it himself now. Your mother's sacrifice. Blood magic. The wards. Safer than anywhere. He'd turned it over in his head enough times to know all the places where it didn't quite fit the shape of an argument. I'm asking what happens if I say I don't want to go back. In the courtroom. If I say it out loud. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Around them, the corridor moved and murmured. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door slammed. The ministry will take your views into consideration, Dumbledore said, and somehow managed to make this sound both true and meaningless at the same time. Harry looked back at his trainers. Right. They sat in silence for another minute. Then the door opened again and a thin witch with a clipboard beckoned them in. Courtroom 5 was not what Harry had expected. He'd imagined something like a school assembly room, or maybe the inside of a church. Instead it looked like a theater that had been repurposed for punishment, tiered stone benches arranged in a horseshoe around a central floor, each bench occupied by witches and wizards in formal robes, their faces carrying the expressions of people who had already made up their minds and were now waiting for the meeting to confirm it. At the center of the floor was a single chair fitted with chains, which Harry stared at. "Those are not for you," Dumbledore said quietly, following his gaze. "This is not a criminal proceeding. The chains are simply traditional." A woman at the head of the upper tier, sharp-faced and wearing a bow in her hair that sat at odds with everything else about her, called the room to order. Madame Griselda Marchbanks, Harry thought. He'd seen the name on the scroll. Head of the Wizarding Examinations Authority, sitting in for the full Wisengamot, which apparently couldn't be bothered to convene for a child custody matter. Only about a third of the tiered benches were occupied. Harry counted 11 people plus Marchbanks, plus a court scribe whose quick-quotes quill was already moving, plus a heavy-set wizard standing by the door who had the look of someone put there to make things official. Dumbledore guided Harry to a pair of chairs set on the floor rather than the bench, a detail Harry noticed and filed away. They were being seated below the people deciding his life. The architecture of the room made the point before anyone had to say a word. "We are convened," Marchbanks said, in a voice like a metronome, "for the review of guardianship in the matter of Harry James Potter, ward of Petunia Desley née Evans and Vernon Desley of Surrey. Present as advocate and interested party is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Order of Merlin First Class, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." She glanced up from her parchment. "Are both parties present and prepared to proceed?" "They are," Dumbledore said. The review began. It was, for the first 15 minutes, exactly as dull as Dumbledore had suggested, a series of procedural questions that Dumbledore answered smoothly, a brief account of Harry's academic performance at Hogwarts that made several people on the benches nod with the satisfaction of those hearing expected information, a question about Harry's health and development that Harry answered himself in 2 sentences that seemed to surprise no one and satisfy everyone. The court scribe's quill scratched steadily. The heavy-set wizard by the door yawned behind his hand. Harry had the feeling of watching a machine. Not a malicious machine, exactly. Just a machine that had already been programmed with the output before it started, going through the motions of producing that output in the correct order so that it could be called a process. He was going back to the Dursleys. That had been decided before he sat down. All of this was paperwork. He was thinking about the best way to say something, the words arranging themselves in his head the way they did when he'd rehearsed a thing too many times, when the doors of courtroom 5 opened. Not knocked. Not creaked. Opened, both of them simultaneously, with the particular authority of someone who doesn't push doors so much as the doors simply get out of the way. The man who walked in was tall, not imposingly tall, not the height of someone who needed height to be intimidating, but the kind of tall that suggested everything else about him was also precisely calibrated. He wore a suit so dark it seemed to absorb the torchlight rather than reflect it, perfectly fitted, with a deep burgundy tie that was the exact color of something that had been red once and had become richer with time. His face was handsome in the way that old paintings were handsome, strong and deliberate, each feature placed with intent. His hair was dark and swept back. His eyes, catching the light as he looked around the room, were amber with something underneath them that was not light. He was smiling. It was not a nervous smile, or a polite smile, or even a charming smile, though it was that too. It was the smile of a man who had just arrived somewhere he'd been looking forward to visiting, and who found that it was exactly as small as he'd expected. Behind him walked a woman. Dark-skinned, dark-eyed, her face wearing an expression that somehow suggested she had already assessed every person in the room and found all of them slightly lacking. She carried nothing. She needed nothing. She moved like a weapon that had learned to be patient. The room had gone quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something enters that doesn't match any category available. Marchbanks recovered first. "This is a closed proceeding. I'll ask you to, Griselda Marchbanks," the man said pleasantly, still walking toward the center of the floor, his hands in his pockets, graduated Hogwarts 1921, sat her NEWTS with the highest transfiguration marks of her decade, and has presided over 43 guardianship reviews in this room, all of which resulted in the outcome recommended by the first advocate to present. He stopped in the middle of the floor, a few feet from Harry and Dumbledore, and turned the smile on Marchbanks with full focus. "I did my research. I always do." "Who are you?" one of the Wisengamot members demanded. The man turned his amber gaze in that direction, and the Wisengamot member sat back slightly in a way that suggested he regretted asking. "My name," the man said, "is Lucifer Morningstar." A pause, comfortable and unhurried. "And I have a prior claim on the boy." The room erupted. Not loudly, wizards, Harry was learning, tended to express alarm in murmurs rather than shouts, a kind of collective controlled panic that sounded like a large collection of people all trying to be the one who pointed out the problem first. Marchbanks was calling for order. The scribe's quill was going very fast. The heavy-set wizard by the door was no longer yawning. Dumbledore had gone still. Harry had noticed this about Dumbledore over the course of the year, the way he went still when something arrived that hadn't been in his calculations. It was different from ordinary stillness. It was the stillness of a great machine encountering unexpected resistance, gears halting, assessment happening behind the eyes at speed. He was looking at Lucifer Morningstar the way Harry had seen him look at the mirror of Ariste, with recognition, and with something he was working very hard not to let be concern. "There is no prior claim," Dumbledore said, his voice measured and pleasant. The guardianship of Harry Potter was established through blood magic of the highest order, recognized and registered by the Ministry of Magic in the autumn of 1981. Any subsequent claim would require a contract older than the Ministry, signed in the presence of something that predates every piece of legislation your charming institution has ever produced. Lucifer reached into his jacket and produced a document. Not a scroll, a document, pages bound together, the material they were made of somewhere between paper and vellum and neither, covered in writing that the torchlight seemed slightly reluctant to illuminate. He set it on the scribe's table without looking at the scribe, who scrambled back in their chair. "There it is. I'll give you a moment to look it over." Marchbanks stared at it. Then she reached out, slowly, and picked it up. The room went quieter. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone is afraid that what they were about to say might turn out to be wrong. Harry leaned slightly toward Lucifer, because the man was standing close enough and nothing about him suggested Harry needed to stay away. "What is that?" Lucifer glanced down at him with what appeared to be genuine interest, as if he'd been waiting for Harry to speak and was pleased it had happened. "A contract, Harry. A very specific, very binding contract, established." He tilted his head slightly, approximately 4 years ago, in a small space under a staircase in Surrey, when a 7-year-old boy made a wish with enough genuine feeling behind it to reach somewhere very deep indeed. He paused. "You asked for someone to come. Specifically, you asked for someone who wouldn't be afraid of your uncle. Someone who couldn't be shouted at. Someone who would come and just make it stop." Harry stared at him. "I don't answer every wish, you understand. I'm not a fairy." The smile shifted, warmer and more crooked. "But occasionally, the terms are interesting. The sincerity is convincing." "You didn't come," Harry said. Not accusatory. Just a fact he was checking. "No. The timing wasn't right, and frankly, the contractual machinery takes a while to process. But I did note it. I marked it. And when I heard there was a formal proceeding being arranged to decide your future, I thought, well. Now the timing is rather perfect." He turned back to Marchbanks, who had been reading the document with the expression of a woman who very much wished she could put it down but had discovered she couldn't stop reading it. "Satisfied?" Marchbanks set the document down carefully and looked at the room. "This appears to be," she stopped. "Start it again. The language here is not ministry standard. The binding medium is, pre-creation, Lucifer offered helpfully. Predates your ministry by quite a significant margin. Several orders of magnitude, actually. The magic it's written in is somewhat older than the concept of magic as you'd recognize it. I appreciate that's a lot to take in on a Tuesday morning. One of the Wisengamot members, a heavy-set witch with an elaborate hat, had gone pale. "The Morningstar," she said, very quietly, to the wizard sitting next to her. The wizard did not respond because he appeared to have temporarily forgotten how to do that. Dumbledore rose from his chair. When Albus Dumbledore stood in a room and decided to use his presence, it was not a subtle thing. The air changed, the light seemed to pay more attention to him, and the accumulated weight of everything he was and had done gathered behind him like a tide. It was, Harry thought, genuinely impressive, and it usually worked. Lucifer looked at him with polite interest, the way one might look at a particularly intricate clock. "Lucifer," Dumbledore said, with the careful tone of a man speaking to something he is taking very seriously, "whatever claim you believe you hold, you must understand that Harry's situation is not simple." "Yes, I can see that." Lucifer clasped his hands behind his back. "You've put a great deal of work into making it complicated, haven't you? 11 years of, what's the word, management. Keep him small, keep him unaware, keep him exactly humble enough to do what you need him to do when the time comes." His voice hadn't changed temperature. It was still pleasant, conversational, the way a very controlled fire is warm without being dangerous, unless you forgot for a moment that it was fire. "I'm not criticizing the craftsmanship, Albus. I've watched humans build great strategic architectures for millennia. Yours is genuinely impressive. A boy who survived because his mother loved him, turned into a weapon aimed at a man you once taught, by the accumulated choices of everyone around him and none of his own." The room was completely silent. Harry felt something move in his chest, not quite pain, not quite anger, something that had been living behind his sternum for a long time and had never found the right shape to take. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore's expression was still composed. That was the frightening thing, Harry realized. It was still composed. There was no flinch, no protest, no flood of denial. There was just management. Assessment. The gears still turning. "You are not his guardian," Dumbledore said. Whatever that document purports to, the document on the scribe's table pulsed. There was no other word for it. It pulsed with a light that was not quite gold and not quite white, a brief, deep pulse like a single beat from something enormous, and 3 of the Wisengamot members made involuntary sounds and grabbed their chairs. "I am whatever that document says I am," Lucifer said pleasantly, "and what it says is quite clear, I think, to anyone who reads it carefully. The claim is prior in time, absolute in nature, and recognized by an authority that was old when your laws were young." The boy made a genuine appeal in genuine distress, the terms were met, the binding holds. He glanced at Marchbanks. "You feel it. Don't you?" Marchbanks was gripping the edge of her desk. She was a very contained woman, Harry could see that, the kind of person who had spent decades in institutional authority and had learned to let nothing show on her face. But her knuckles were white. And she was looking at Lucifer Morningstar the way people looked at the edge of something very high. "The binding is," she started. "Real," Lucifer said. "I know. They always are." Dumbledore stepped forward. It was a small step, but deliberate, and it carried all of that same gravitational presence. "I must ask," he began, and something moved in the air around him, something that Harry had never consciously noticed before but recognized now, a kind of magical pressure, warm and certain, the kind of power that shaped rooms and minds by existing in them. It lasted about 2 seconds against Lucifer Morningstar. It didn't break, exactly. It didn't crumble dramatically. It simply stopped mattering. Like a candle held up against the open sky. Dumbledore's eyes widened slightly, and for one unguarded moment, one genuine, unscripted moment, Harry saw the old man look uncertain. Genuinely uncertain. Not calculating uncertainty. Real uncertainty. Careful, Lucifer said, still pleasant, still warm, still utterly without malice. I know that's your way of reminding people who you are. In other rooms, with other people, I imagine it's very effective. This is not that room, and I am not those people. And if you do that again, I will stop being polite about it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He didn't do anything that should have been frightening. And yet 3 people on the Wiesengemot benches stood up and then sat back down again without seeming to know why they'd done either thing. Dumbledore stepped back. Harry watched it happen and understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has spent years watching power dynamics in operation, that something had just shifted that could not be shifted back. The question before this body, Lucifer said, turning back to Marchbanks and addressing the room as if nothing had just happened and nothing needed to be remarked upon, is simple. You have a document establishing a prior claim that exists prior to and outside the jurisdiction of this ministry. You have a child who, with respect, Madam Marchbanks, has presented in this courtroom with the body language of someone who has learned not to ask for things and the posture of someone who has been made small by people who were meant to make him large. And you have a process that was, as everyone in this room is quietly aware, already arranged to produce a specific outcome before anyone sat down. He paused. I find that tedious. I find arranged outcomes very tedious. I believe in free will, proper free will, not the kind people are offered after the best options have already been removed. He turned to Harry then, and his expression changed in a way that was different from how he'd looked at everyone else in the room. Not softer, exactly. More direct. Harry. Do you want to go back to the house in Surrey? The room waited. Harry could feel it, 11 people and Marchbanks and Dumbledore, all of their attention concentrated on him. He was used to being the object of attention that had nothing to do with him. He was not used to being asked directly. He thought about the cupboard. He thought about the way mealtimes worked in the Dursleys' house, the particular mathematics of his presence, enough to keep him functional, never enough to suggest he was wanted. He thought about his birthday coming and going in 2 weeks and that no one on Privet Drive would mention it, and how he had learned not to mention it either. He thought about going back to that house and knowing, now, what he knew, that there was a war being shaped around him, that his survival had been planned for a purpose, that the people making the decisions about his life were not asking him anything. No, he said. Clear and simple. I don't. Lucifer's smile was brief and genuine and not performed for anyone in the room. Good, he said. Then let's do this properly. What followed was not quick, but it was inevitable, in the way that things are inevitable when one side has unassailable grounds and the other side has only habit. Marchbanks called for an evidentiary review of the document. 2 senior wizards were brought in from the Department of Mysteries, Unspeakables, Harry later learned they were called, who examined the document for 40 minutes while the rest of the room waited and Lucifer sat in a chair he'd conjured from nothing and read what appeared to be a paperback novel he'd produced from his jacket pocket. The woman who'd come in with him, she'd introduced herself to no one, and no one had quite found the nerve to ask, stood near the door and looked at various people until they stopped looking at her. The Unspeakables came back looking like men who had encountered something outside their frame of reference and were professionally required not to say so. They confirmed the document was authentic. They confirmed the binding magic was active. They confirmed, in careful, technical language that seemed to physically pain them, that the authority behind the contract was, in the terminology of the Department of Mysteries, category absolute, which meant it superseded all domestic wizarding law. Category absolute, Marchbanks repeated. Yes, Madam Marchbanks. That designation hasn't been invoked since 1289, the older of the 2 Unspeakables said. The Griffin Compact of Edinburgh. Yes. Dumbledore had sat back down during all of this. He was watching. Still thinking, Harry could almost hear it, the great engine of the man turning over options, measuring outcomes, finding angles. He was not done. Harry knew he was not done. But for the moment, in this room, the thing he'd built had encountered a wall it hadn't expected, and he was recalculating. Albus. Lucifer closed his book and looked at Dumbledore with something that was almost companionable. I want you to understand, I'm not here to destroy your plan entirely. I find your dedication to it genuinely, if grimly, admirable. But the boy isn't a piece. He can be a great deal more than a piece, and he cannot be that while he's being kept in a cupboard and told to be grateful for the keeping. He tilted his head. You've met people like me before. You know what I am. You know the document is real. So let's skip the part where you look for the procedural angle, shall we? There isn't one. I checked. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Something very complicated moved across his face, not defeat, not anything so clean as that. The look of a man rearranging things around a new obstacle, finding what could still be salvaged, what new geometries were available. I want access, Dumbledore said finally. To Harry. Continued access, and continued, educational oversight? Lucifer offered. He'll still attend Hogwarts. I have no objection to education. In fact, I'm very much in favor of it. An informed conscience is a better conscience, and, he caught himself and made a small, wry gesture, well. That's a conversation for another time. Harry attends Hogwarts. He maintains his friendships. He lives a life. You get to educate him. A pause. You don't get to manage him. You don't get to keep things from him for his own supposed good. You don't get to use the love his mother had for him as a leash. His voice was still pleasant. The pleasantness was, somehow, the most serious thing about it. Are those terms acceptable? Marchbanks cleared her throat. There is still the matter of the blood ward. The blood ward requires proximity to blood family, yes. Lucifer glanced at her. A limitation that assumes the only protection available to the boy is a charm tied to a house in Surrey. I find that assumption, uncharacteristically limited, in a world that has me in it. He stood, smoothly, as if the meeting were simply concluded and everyone was waiting to be told so. The document is valid. The claim is recognized. If the ministry wants to contest it, they're welcome to file with the relevant authority. He smiled. Though I'd recommend looking up who that authority is before committing to that course. No one filed anything. Marchbanks, with the particular exhausted pragmatism of a woman who had run up against something categorically unmovable and had enough institutional experience to know when to stop, confirmed the guardianship change in the record. The court scribe's quill moved with what might have been frantic energy or simple diligence, it was hard to tell. Forms were produced. The unspeakables witnessed them. Dumbledore signed where required and did not speak while he did it, and Harry watched the old man's hands on the quill and thought about all the things those hands had arranged and all the things he hadn't known about and all the things he was going to have to sort out now that someone had finally said them out loud. When it was done, Lucifer walked over to Harry and offered him a hand. Not a performative gesture, just practical, a person offering to help another person stand. Harry took it. Come on, then, Lucifer said. I'll show you where you'll be living. Mazikeen, this to the woman by the door, make sure Albus gets out safely. I don't need, Dumbledore began. Of course not. She's making sure the building is safe for you. It's very different. Lucifer was already walking toward the doors, Harry beside him. I'm extraordinarily considerate, as the people who know me will tell you. As they reached the doors, Harry glanced back. The courtroom looked different from this angle, smaller, more tired, a group of people sitting in their stone tiers holding on to their familiar order and watching the shape of it change around them. Dumbledore stood in the middle of the floor, the document on the scribe's table still faintly glowing, and his eyes met Harry's across the room. The warm certainty was still there. The gears were still turning. He wasn't finished. But Harry was no longer a piece on a board. That was new. That was the thing that had changed, and no amount of rearranging could change it back. He turned and walked out of courtroom 5 beside the devil, and for the first time in his memory, he walked out of a room taller than he'd walked in. The corridors of level 10 were quiet at this hour, long stone passages that swallowed sound and returned it in muted, distorted echoes. Lucifer walked through them without glancing at the walls or the numbers on the doors or any of the things that people generally looked at when navigating unfamiliar places. He clearly knew where he was going, or alternatively, he'd decided that anywhere he went became the right direction by virtue of him going there. Harry matched his stride, had to stretch a little to do it, and tried to organize the previous hour into something he could think about clearly. "That document," he said, as they turned into a longer corridor that led toward the lifts. "When I was 7. In the cupboard. I don't remember making you said a wish. I don't remember it. You wouldn't." Lucifer pressed the button for the lift without slowing. It wasn't a spoken thing. It wasn't even a conscious thing, entirely. It was the kind of appeal that comes from a place underneath intention. You were 7 years old, alone in a space no one should sleep in, and you wanted, very deeply, very genuinely, for someone to come who wasn't afraid of anything. He glanced down at Harry. "That kind of wanting has a particular resonance. I notice it." The lift arrived. They stepped in. It was empty except for a bored-looking ministry memo, a paper airplane that had lost its way and was fluttering sadly near the ceiling. "Are you afraid of anything?" Harry asked. Lucifer was quiet for a moment. Then, "No." The word was simple and not boastful. Just accurate. Like saying you were right-handed or that the sky was a particular color. "What about my situation?" Harry said, carefully. "Voldemort, and the prophecy, and all of it. Does that change?" Lucifer looked at him, and there was something in the look that was measuring, but not in the way Dumbledore's had been measuring. It wasn't looking for what Harry could be used for. It was something closer to curiosity. Genuine curiosity, the kind that didn't already have the answer prepared. "What do you want it to be?" Lucifer asked. "I want to be the one who decides." "Then yes," Lucifer said. "That changes." A pause. "For what it's worth, and I realize this is an unusual thing for me to say, given everything, I don't think you should be anyone's weapon. I think you should be Harry Potter. Whatever that turns out to mean, specifically." He glanced at the paper airplane still wobbling near the ceiling, and it straightened itself and flew purposefully toward the correct floor without being told. "We'll figure the rest out as we go." The lift opened at the atrium. Mazikeen was already there, having somehow arrived before them by means that Harry decided not to ask about. The golden fountain in the center of the atrium caught the morning light coming through the enchanted high windows, and the figures in it, the wizard, the witch, the centaur, the goblin, the house elf, gleamed with the particular self-satisfaction of a thing that had decided what all those beings should look like standing together. Lucifer glanced at the fountain as they passed. "Hideous thing," he remarked, pleasantly. "I keep meaning to mention it to someone." "Are you going to?" Harry asked. "Probably not today." They walked out of the Ministry of Magic into the grey London morning, stepping from the visitors' entrance booth onto a muggle street where black cabs and buses moved with cheerful indifference to everything that had just happened 50 feet below them. Harry stood on the pavement and felt the ordinary air on his face, petrol and rain and the distant smell of a bakery somewhere, and tried to find the edge of the feeling in his chest, the one that had been finding its shape since the courtroom. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't relief. It was something more tentative and more durable than either of those. It felt, he thought, a little like the first day of something. Right. Lucifer straightened his jacket and looked up and down the street with mild satisfaction. Home, then. Mazikeen moved to flag a cab with one hand while looking at her phone with the other. The cab stopped immediately, because cabs always stopped for her, though Harry suspected this was not a power anyone wanted to examine too closely. You have a home? Harry said. I have a penthouse. It's not quite the same thing, but we'll work on it. Lucifer opened the cab door and gestured for Harry to get in first, with the easy courtesy of someone who simply did things without making them a statement. It's in Mayfair. The building is, he tilted his head slightly, as if searching for the right word, responsive. Responsive to what? To me, mostly. Occasionally to strong feelings in general. He got in after Harry, and Mazikeen followed, and the door closed, and the cab pulled into traffic. You'll see. I find it easier to show than to explain. London moved around them, ordinary and enormous, people and buses and pigeons and building fronts, the whole vast impersonal city going about its morning. Harry watched it through the window and thought about the courtroom and about Dumbledore's face and about a contract made by a 7-year-old in the dark, and about the word ward, which was different from weapon and different from tool and was, he thought, something closer to chosen. Mazikeen said, from the front, without turning, the boy is thinking too loud. He's adjusting, Lucifer said, without any particular concern. Give him a moment. Harry looked at Lucifer. What am I adjusting to, exactly? Lucifer considered this with apparent genuine thought. The knowledge that your life is yours, he said. Most people find that the hardest adjustment of all. The cab drove through Mayfair, and the building they stopped in front of was tall and narrow and unremarkable from the outside in the way that things sometimes are when they're saving it. Harry stepped out onto the pavement and looked up at it, this ordinary London building with its ordinary black door and its ordinary brass fixtures, and it looked back at him in a way that buildings don't usually manage. He picked up his trunk. Mazikeen had retrieved it from somewhere while he wasn't paying attention, which he thought he'd also decide not to examine, and walked toward the door. This, he thought, was the first day of something. He pushed the door open and went in. Chapter 2, the penthouse at the edge of the world. The lift inside the building didn't have buttons. Harry stood in it, his trunk wedged at his feet, Hedwig's cage balanced on top of it, and looked at the brass panel where buttons should have been and found only a smooth, warm surface that his fingers sank into slightly before pulling back, as if the metal were thinking about him. Just think about where you want to go, Lucifer said from behind him, perfectly at ease, checking something on his phone with the expression of someone who had long since stopped finding any of this remarkable. I don't know where I want to go. I've never been here before. Then think about going up. A beat. Generally upward is a good start. Harry thought about up. The lift moved. Not with the mechanical clunk of a ministry lift or the grinding shudder of the Hogwarts staircases, it moved the way water moved when it decided to, smoothly and with complete confidence in its own direction. The brass walls caught his reflection and warped it gently, not cruelly, more like a suggestion than a distortion. It opened onto the penthouse and Harry stepped out and stopped. The space was large in a way that didn't quite correspond to the outside of the building. He'd noticed that about magical places, the way they refused to be constrained by their exteriors, but this was different from the Weasley's house or Diagon Alley's shops. Those places felt like magic had been crammed into them out of necessity, or joy, or both. This felt like the space itself had simply been told that size was a matter of perspective, and had agreed. Tall windows ran the length of the south wall, looking out over London from a height that seemed greater than the building's exterior had suggested was possible. Below, the city sprawled in the grey July morning, red buses, and the silver thread of the Thames and the green expanses of parks, everything going about its business with no idea it was being watched from somewhere that shouldn't quite exist. The floor was dark wood, rich and warm, and the furniture was the kind that had been chosen rather than accumulated, deep sofas in charcoal and burgundy, low tables, bookshelves that climbed to the ceiling and were full in the way that suggested the books had been read, not displayed. On a grand piano in the corner, sheet music was open to something Harry didn't recognize. But what Harry was actually looking at, what pulled his attention with the same insistence as a sound in a dark room, was the ceiling. It was night up there. Not a painted night, not an enchanted facsimile like the Great Hall ceiling. The actual sky, black and full of stars, deep and clear the way the sky above London never actually was, constellations Harry half recognized turning slowly overhead in a dome of genuine dark. He tipped his head back and stared at it, and the light from those stars fell on his face, cool and faint and unimaginably old. "That's real," he said. "Not a question. More or less." Lucifer moved past him, shrugging off his jacket and draping it over the back of a chair with practiced ease. "The ceiling opens to a sky that exists in the same way I exist, which is to say, not entirely within normal spatial categories. The stars are real stars. The sky is not exactly London's sky." He glanced up briefly and with something that looked almost fond. "I find it companionable." Mazikeen had gone directly to the kitchen, which Harry could see was to his left and was full of surfaces that gleamed and a smell of something roasting that made his stomach make a sound he hoped no one heard. "There are 4 bedrooms," Lucifer said, moving toward the bookshelves in the manner of a man doing several things at once. "The one at the east end of the corridor is yours. The door will respond to you. The kitchen has food that will be edible and regular, because I understand growing humans have requirements in that area, and Mazikeen," he raised his voice slightly toward the kitchen, "has agreed to manage the schedule." "I didn't agree," Mazikeen said, from the kitchen, without any particular heat. "She has provisionally agreed pending clarification of terms. I said I'd feed him because he's small and it seemed practical." Harry looked between them. "Thank you," he called toward the kitchen. A pause. Then, "Don't thank me yet. I don't make anything mild." Lucifer selected a book from the shelf without seeming to look for it and settled into one of the large chairs. "Explore," he told Harry. "The building won't hurt you. Most of it is safe, and the parts that aren't are clearly labeled." "Parts that aren't?" "One closet on the 3rd floor should be left alone. It's labeled. You'll see." He opened the book. "Not a rule, merely a recommendation. You're free to do as you like." Harry stood with his trunk and his owl and the vast London skyline behind him and thought about the word free, which was apparently going to require recalibration. He'd spent 11 years in an environment where his movements, his words, his food, his space, and his very existence were managed through the accumulated weight of other people's decisions. He'd spent the last year at Hogwarts in an environment that was warmer and more generous but still fundamentally structured around what was expected of him, the boy who lived, the Gryffindor, Dumbledore's student. Even the kindness had been shaped by what he was supposed to be. Here was a man who had opened a door and said explore and meant it. Harry picked up his trunk and went to find the east bedroom. The corridor was lined with doors, some of them wood, one of them a deep blue that seemed to shift when looked at directly, one of them stone with a brass plaque that said "Leave this one alone" in very plain lettering, which Harry noted and filed away for later consideration. The east door was plain dark wood and it warmed under his palm when he touched it, and when it swung open he stood in the threshold for a moment and took it in. The room was simple, simpler than he expected, after the penthouse's grandeur. A bed, a proper one, a desk by the window, a wardrobe, bookshelves empty and ready. The window looked east across the city, and the morning light was coming in at an angle that made the floor glow. On the desk was a small lamp that was off, and a piece of paper, and a pen. He set down his trunk and walked to the desk and picked up the paper. It had one line on it, in handwriting that was slanted and precise: "The room is yours. It changes to suit. Don't be polite about it." Harry set the paper down and looked at the room, and then, because the instruction had been explicit, tried not to be polite about it. He thought about what he'd actually wanted, the nights in the cupboard and then the nights in the too small bedroom at the Dursleys, the things he'd imagined having. A place to put his books. Enough light to read by. A window he could open. A lock on the door that he controlled. The room didn't shift dramatically. It wasn't theatrical about it. But when he looked again, the bookshelves were better positioned, and the window was slightly larger, and there was a second lamp on the bedside table with a warm, readable glow, and on the inside of the door there was a lock. He stood there for a moment and breathed. Then he let Hedwig out, and she took one loop around the room, regarded the open window with satisfaction, and disappeared into the London morning to see about breakfast on her own terms. Harry unpacked his trunk with the methodical focus of someone who has learned to find stability in small organized tasks. His school books went on the shelves. His wand went on the desk, within reach. The photo album Hagrid had given him, the one with his parents in it, he set on the bedside table, face up, because he was trying to practice the habit of not putting things away. He washed his face in the bathroom that had appeared adjoining the room and went back to the main space. Mazikeen was in the kitchen doing something aggressive and confident with several ingredients simultaneously. Harry stopped at the counter and watched her, because she was interesting to watch. She moved like someone who had never been uncertain about where their body was in space, every action direct and economical. "Can I help?" he asked. She looked at him. She had a way of looking at people that involved a slight tilt of the head and a quality of attention that suggested she was reading something beneath the surface of the question. Harry, who was used to being looked at and found wanting, or looked at and found useful, waited to find out what category this was. "Can you chop?" she said. "Yeah." She pointed at a pile of vegetables and a knife. Harry chopped. For a while the kitchen was quiet except for the sound of food being prepared, which was a comfortable kind of sound, warm and purposeful. Harry had, in fact, spent a great deal of his childhood cooking, because the Dursleys had required it of him, but he'd learned to separate the task from the context and mostly he just found it settling. "You're not what I expected," Mazikeen said. He glanced at her. "What did you expect?" "More," she considered, trembling. I think I'm in the bit where the shock hasn't finished arriving yet," he said honestly. "I suspect there'll be trembling later." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't quite a smile but it was in the vicinity of one. "That's more honest than most people manage. Lucifer said I was free to do what I liked. Seemed like being honest was a good place to start." She looked at him again, the same assessing look, and this time something settled in it. "You'll do," she said, in a tone that Harry suspected was significant, and turned back to the pan. They ate breakfast, actually ate, at an actual table, with actual food in quantities that were based on what a person might want rather than what a person was permitted, and Lucifer was present but reading, because apparently he could eat and read simultaneously with the ease of someone who had been doing it for eons, and Mazikeen sat across from Harry and asked him, in short, direct questions, about Hogwarts. Not about the stone, not about Voldemort, not about Dumbledore or his scar or the things everyone else wanted to talk about. She asked about the classes he'd liked, the ones he hadn't, whether the food was good, what the other students were like. Astronomy, he said, when she asked what he'd enjoyed. And, defense against the dark arts, when the teacher wasn't making it strange. What made it strange? Professor Quirrell, he wore a turban and he smelled of garlic and he stuttered. And I think, Harry paused, considering how much to say, and then remembered the morning's theme and said all of it. I think something was very wrong with him. There was something, when he got near me, my scar hurt. Silence. He looked up from his eggs. Lucifer had lowered his book. Your scar, Lucifer said carefully. The one from, when Voldemort killed my parents and tried to kill me and the curse rebounded. Harry touched his forehead out of habit. It's hurt before, when Voldemort's been, close, somehow. Last year there was he stopped again, looked at his plate, then looked up. I broke into a section of the school that was off limits and found a mirror and Quirrell showed up and Voldemort was on the back of his head, and I stopped him getting the Philosopher's Stone. He said it all at once and then waited. Lucifer's expression was composed, thoughtful, and entirely without the specific cocktail of alarm and strategic calculation Harry was used to seeing on adult faces when this particular information was delivered. He just processed it. Like someone hearing about a complicated situation and taking it seriously without making it about what he needed to do next. The soul fragment, Lucifer said. Harry blinked. What? When a curse of that magnitude rebounds, when it's carrying the weight of genuine murderous intent and it strikes a protection as absolute as your mother's sacrifice, it doesn't simply fail. Something breaks. In the caster. He set the book down fully. Tom Riddle broke himself before he ever came for your family. He had been breaking himself for years. The final fracture, the night he attacked you, sent a piece of him in the only direction with momentum, forward. Into the nearest living vessel. A pause. Into you. Harry stared at him. You have a piece of Voldemort's soul in your scar, Harry said slowly. He'd half known this, had circled it, in the long quiet hours at the Dursleys over the past few weeks, pulling at threads and following implications. But hearing it stated plainly, without softening, without the implication that it was too much for him to handle, made it land differently. Dumbledore knows. I'd be surprised if he didn't. And he hasn't told me. No. Because what he intends to do with that information requires you not to know it. Lucifer's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel. What he needs from you, at the end of all this, requires that you walk into something willingly, and you will walk into it more willingly if you don't know the full cost of it in advance. He looked at Harry steadily. I'm telling you now because you asked me to be the kind of guardian who doesn't manage information. And because you are 12 years old, 11. 11 years old, and you deserve to know what's living in your head. Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, London went on being London. Hedwig had come back to the window ledge and was watching them all with round amber eyes. Can it be removed? He asked. Yes. How? The same way most things of that nature are addressed. Lucifer picked up his coffee. With deliberate action at the correct moment. We have time. Tom Riddle is currently the back of a dead man's head, he's not going anywhere fast. He said this with the serene composure of someone who had a very long view of timelines and found most urgencies to be overstated. The more important question right now is what you want to do with the next 6 weeks before you go back to school. Harry looked at him. You said there was time. That doesn't mean I want to waste it. Lucifer smiled, the real one, the brief unperformed one. No. I didn't think you would. He tilted his head toward the bookshelves. I have things that would be useful to you. Some of them are books. Some of them are conversations. Some of them are, a glance at Mazikeen, practical. Mazikeen, without looking up from her breakfast, I'll teach you to fight properly. Harry looked at her. What does properly mean? Not the way wizards fight. She said the word wizards with the affectionate contempt of someone who had watched wizards fight many times and found the whole affair inefficient. They wave sticks at each other. Powerful, yes. But anyone who relies entirely on a single tool is fragile. She met his eyes. You should not be fragile. I wasn't planning on it, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment and then gave the thing that might have been a smile its full expression, brief and sharp and genuine. Good. The next 3 weeks established themselves into a rhythm that Harry hadn't known he was hungry for until he had it. Mornings were physical. Mazikeen took him to the roof, which opened like a secret, a door at the end of the top corridor that led up a short staircase and then out into a space that was larger than it should have been and was walled on all sides by air and low parapet, the city spread below, the sky close. She taught him to fall correctly first. That was the first 3 days, nothing else, just falling, in every direction, controlled and uncontrolled, how to roll with it and how to absorb it and how to redirect it into movement. You're not afraid of falling, she observed, after he'd taken a drop from a ledge twice his height and come up already turning to face her. Not really. Why not? He thought about it. I fly. I've fallen off broomsticks. You learn that falling isn't the problem is what you do with it while it's happening. She considered this. That's a better answer than most adults give. After falling, she taught him the language of bodies in conflict, where force was generated, where it could be redirected, where a person was open even when they thought they weren't. He was small and quick and he didn't try to be large, which she told him was the right instinct. He fought small, he fought fast, and he fought dirty when dirtiness was an option, and she approved of all of these things. He went back to school, they both understood, not as a boy who needed protection. As a boy who knew how to protect himself. Evenings were different. After dinner, Mazakine's cooking was extraordinary and consistently the temperature of a mild emergency. Lucifer would open the penthouse's south wall entirely, the windows becoming nothing and the night air coming in, and they'd sit with the stars overhead and Lucifer would ask Harry questions. Not tell. Ask. What did Harry think about what had happened in his first year? What would he have done differently? What had confused him? What had felt wrong? Harry had never had conversations like these. Not because the adults in his life were cruel. Hermione was brilliant and Ron was honest and Professor McGonagall was good in the measured way of people who had made themselves reliable, but because the questions adults asked Harry were almost always implicitly pointed toward what they needed from the answer. Lucifer asked questions and then listened to the answers the way someone listened to music, fully and without an agenda. Dumbledore told me the stone was destroyed, Harry said, on one of these evenings. Flamel agreed to it. He said, Dumbledore said, that death was the next great adventure. And you didn't buy it. He said it like he believed it. But the stone being destroyed means Quirrell was stopped. And Voldemort being stopped, even temporarily, means the plan moves forward. Harry had his knees drawn up, looking at the city. It was convenient. It was, Lucifer agreed. Is Flamel actually dead? A small smile. Nicholas Flamel will die when Nicholas Flamel decides to, and not before. He is not a man who is moved by convenience. A pause. The stone, however, is genuinely gone. Some choices, even large ones, are actually about what they appear to be about. Harry nodded slowly. I want to know more about Voldemort. Not in a, I want to understand him. What he actually is, not just what he represents. Lucifer looked at him. Why? Because everyone treats him like a force of nature. Like weather. And he's not. He's a person who made choices. And if I understand the choices, I understand the person. A beat. You can fight weather. You can fight a person. Lucifer was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke there was something in his voice that was different from his normal register, still unhurried, still measured, but carrying something personal around the edges of it. Tom Riddle was brilliant. He was abandoned. He was angry in the particular way that happens when someone is made to feel fundamentally wrong by the world they're born into, and instead of bearing it, he decided to make the world fundamentally wrong instead. He looked at the city. I've known that story before. In other contexts. The instinct to take the pain and weaponize it, it's very human. Very understandable. What makes Tom different from 1,000 other brilliant, angry, abandoned people is that he had no ceiling. He could do anything, and so he did everything, and there was no one and nothing that ever made him feel a consequence until it was too late. He paused. That's not a force of nature. You're right. It's a man who was never interrupted. Until my mum interrupted him. Until your mum interrupted him. A beat. Love is the only thing that is consistently more stubborn than cruelty. I've had a long time to observe the ratio. On the 12th day, a letter arrived from the Weasleys, forwarded somehow to the penthouse. Harry hadn't given anyone the address, and when he asked Lucifer about it, Lucifer said, the building has a very sophisticated opinion about mail, and Harry decided to accept that. The letter was from Ron, scrawled across 2 pages in the enthusiastic handwriting of someone who found the act of writing slightly less interesting than having written, full of questions and Quidditch talk and a casual mention at the end that his mom had heard about the guardianship thing through someone at the ministry and wanted to know if Harry was all right. He wrote back immediately, honestly, I'm more all right than I've been in a while, actually, and included the new address and then thought about whether to include anything else. He added, "My guardian is unusual but he listens, which turns out to be the most important thing." He sent the letter with Hedwig and watched her disappear into the London afternoon and felt the small warm persistence of friendship, the thing that continued regardless of everything else. A letter from Hermione arrived 2 days later, because of course it did, organized and thorough, 3 pages covering her reading over the summer, several questions about the stone, she'd clearly been thinking about it as much as he had, and a short paragraph at the end that said, "Mom heard something about a change in your guardianship. I told her you'd tell us if it was important. I hope it's good. It sounds like it might be good." He wrote to her too. Longer. More. The letter from Dumbledore came in the 3rd week. It was polite, of course. Warm, of course. It asked after Harry's health and comfort, expressed hope that his new living arrangements were satisfactory, noted that Hogwarts would welcome him in September as always. And in the middle of it, tucked into the warmth like something folded inside something else, was a suggestion. Merely a suggestion. That Harry might consider speaking with Dumbledore privately, before term, at his convenience. There were things, the letter said, that it would be good for Harry to know before 2nd year. Things Dumbledore could share, in confidence, that would help him understand his position. Harry read it twice. Then he handed it across the breakfast table to Lucifer. Lucifer read it. Set it down. Picked up his coffee. "He's starting," Harry said. "Yes. He wants to get in front of whatever you might tell me. Share his version of the important things first." "Yes. Should I go?" Lucifer considered this for a moment that felt deliberate rather than uncertain. "What do you want to do?" "I want to go," Harry said. "I want to sit across from him and know what I know and listen to what he says and understand the difference between them." A pause. "Is that, I'm not sure if that's brave or stupid." "It's neither." Lucifer set down his coffee. "It's the instinct of someone who prefers to understand their situation rather than avoid it. That's a fine instinct." He leaned back. "You'll go. I'll take you. Dumbledore and I will have a brief conversation while you and he have yours, and then we'll come home." A beat. "He will be making his own calculations simultaneously." "That's fine. You don't need to match him. You just need to be yourself." "What if myself isn't enough?" The look Lucifer gave him then was direct and unhurried and completely without the false warmth of reassurance. "Then we find out what you are when you're more than yourself," he said. "But Harry, I've watched a very great number of people face things that seemed beyond them. The ones who are honest about who they are going in almost always surprise everyone, including themselves." A pause. "And you are not a small person. You are an 11-year-old boy who looked at the most powerful wizard in Britain this morning and asked the questions the most powerful wizard in Britain didn't want asked. That is not nothing." Harry looked at his breakfast. Then looked up. "All right. Good." Lucifer stood, and the morning shifted around him, the light from the south windows finding him the way light did, as if by preference. "Finish your eggs. I want to show you something in the library before we think about Dumbledore." The library was behind one of the plain doors off the main corridor, and Harry had opened it on day 2 and stood in the threshold for a few minutes and then carefully closed it again and gone away to think about it. Because the library was large. Not as large as the Hogwarts library, probably, maybe, but where the Hogwarts library was organized in the familiar way of institutions, with sections and card catalogs and a certain anxious sense of rules, this library had the feeling of something curated over a period of time that made century seem like the wrong unit. Books in every language, including some that Harry was fairly sure weren't human languages. A reading table that sat 4, a leather chair by the window, 2 more chairs by a fireplace that burned blue and cool. Lucifer moved through it with the ease of someone entirely at home, pulling books with the sureness of a man who knew exactly where everything was, setting 3 of them on the table. I want to tell you about the history of magical bloodlines, he said. Not the way wizards tell it, not the purity nonsense, not the political story. The actual history. Where magic comes from, what it is in a human, what it means that you have your mother's magic and your father's, and why the interaction between them produces what it produces. Harry sat down at the table. What does it produce? Something unusual. Lucifer opened the first book, which was in Latin, but the words moved when Harry looked at them, reorganizing into something he could read. Your mother's magic was ancient and deep, old blood, muggle-born in the ministry's phrasing, but that phrase only describes who her immediate parents were, not where the gift came from or how far back it goes. Your father's magic was different in character, precise, formal, extraordinarily controlled. The combination is, he turned a page, your instinct is protective and your power grows under emotional pressure, and you have never in your life cast a spell that didn't mean something to you personally. He looked at Harry over the open book. That's not a coincidence. That's the nature of what you inherited. That sounds like it could be dangerous, unstable. I was going to say inconvenient. Lucifer made a sound that might have been a laugh held back. Only if you resist it. Most wizards are taught to manage their emotions when they cast. You should be taught the opposite, to let the feeling be the spell. He closed the book. We'll start this afternoon. After the library tour. The tour took 2 hours, because Harry had questions at every shelf and Lucifer answered all of them, which led to more questions, which led to more answers, which led Harry along a thread of thought that felt like it would take years to follow to its end. He didn't mind. That was the thing he was finding out about himself this summer, he was hungry. For information, for honesty, for the feeling of a thing making sense instead of being managed into a shape. They were deep in the section on magical theory when Mazikeen appeared at the library door and looked at both of them with the expression of someone who has come to deliver information and is aware the timing is problematic. You have a visitor, she said to Lucifer. Lucifer looked up from the book he was holding. I'm not receiving visitors today. You'll receive this one. A pause. It's ammonadial. A beat of silence. Something moved across Lucifer's face that was complex and briefly unguarded and was gone before Harry could read it fully. Of course it is, Lucifer said, and set the book down. Harry, he glanced over. This will take 20 minutes. There's a section 3 shelves to your left on the history of magical contracts in Britain that you'll find relevant and interesting. Read whatever you like. Harry, who had already noted the word ammonadial and the look on Lucifer's face and who understood that something private and significant was happening, nodded and moved 3 shelves to the left. The voices from the main room were quiet and he didn't try to hear them. He pulled a book about magical contracts from 1643 and read it with genuine attention and thought about a 7-year-old boy in a cupboard who had wanted someone to come, and about contracts, and about what it meant that his wanting had been real enough to count. When Lucifer came back 20 minutes later he was composed and slightly more contained than usual, in the way that people were after they'd put something back in its box. Everything all right? Harry asked. Family, Lucifer said, which answered nothing and everything simultaneously, and then with a deliberate return to the previous warmth, now. Where were we? That evening, Harry sat at his desk in the East Room and wrote in the notebook he'd started keeping. Not a diary, he'd never kept a diary, had always felt that the act of writing things down for yourself implied that they mattered, and he'd spent 11 years being instructed that his things didn't matter. But here, now, with the east window open and London cooling into a blue evening, he was practicing the habit. Writing down what he'd learned and what he thought about it and what questions it opened. He wrote for an hour and then looked up at the city and thought about September and Hogwarts and Dumbledore and the soul fragment in his scar and Voldemort on the back of a dead man's head, and about the next year and all the years after it. He wasn't afraid. That was the most startling thing. He'd expected to be afraid, had been, to some degree, throughout that first courtroom hour, the low hum of dread that was his default setting when authority gathered itself around him. But that dread had been losing ground steadily, every day, in ways that were small and cumulative and real. He thought about what Lucifer had said. "You are not a small person." He thought about what he'd said back. "I want to be the one who decides." He wrote that at the top of the next page in the notebook. Then he wrote under it, "This summer is the first summer of my actual life. I'm going to pay attention." He closed the notebook and went to find dinner. In the kitchen, Mazikeen was doing something to a pan that involved more fire than most people would consider safe, and the smell was extraordinary. Lucifer was at the piano in the far room, playing something slow and technically difficult and deeply sad in the way that beautiful music was sometimes sad, not miserably, but with the richness of something that had lasted. Harry stood in the space between the kitchen and the music and felt the evening settle around him. He realized with the careful wonder of something being discovered for the first time, somewhere that he wanted to be. He went into the kitchen and asked Mazikeen what she was making, and she told him without looking up, and he got 2 plates from the cupboard and set the table without being asked, and the piano kept playing, and the stars came out above the penthouse ceiling, and London spread its 10 million lives in every direction below, and none of it cared who Harry Potter was or what he was supposed to become. It was, he thought, an excellent way to spend a Tuesday. Chapter 3, Diagon Alley and the Weight of a Name. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Thursday morning while Harry was on the roof losing badly to Mazikeen. Not losing badly in the way that meant the lesson was going poorly. She'd made it clear early on that losing was the lesson, that the point of the roof sessions was not winning but understanding, and that anyone who confused the two was going to spend a long time being confused about a lot of things. He was losing badly in the specific sense that she had him on his back on the rooftop surface with her knee 2 inches from his sternum and his arm at an angle it didn't enjoy, and he was trying to find the exit from the position the way she'd shown him, not strength, not struggle, the third option, the option that made the hold unnecessary rather than breaking it directly. He found it. A small shift of weight, a rotation at the hip, the arm becoming a lever rather than a target. He was up in 4 seconds. Mazikeen stood and brushed nothing off her hands, because she hadn't hit the floor at any point. Better. Still 4 seconds. Better than 6. She tilted her head toward the door. "Go see about your letter." He turned. There was no letter visible from where they were standing, which meant she'd sensed it coming, or heard the owl, or simply knew things in the way she sometimes seemed to know things, sideways and without explanation. Harry didn't ask. He'd made a list in the early days of things he was going to eventually ask about and things he was going to accept as the operating conditions of his new life, and Mazikeen's particular awareness of things fell into the second category. The owl, a ministry standard bird, official and humorless, was sitting on the kitchen counter looking like it wanted to be somewhere else. Harry took the letter. The owl left immediately, without waiting for a response or a treat, which said something about the letter's nature. Official correspondence didn't require a reply in kind. It just required that you exist in front of it and receive it. He opened it, and out fell the standard Hogwarts list: parchment, green ink, that particular quality of formal address that managed to be warm and institutional simultaneously. Books, robes, equipment, the note about first years not being permitted their own broomsticks. He hadn't been a first year for 3 weeks and already the note felt dated. With the Hogwarts letter was a second one. Smaller, no official seal. Dumbledore's handwriting. "Harry, I hope the summer has been restful and interesting in equal measure. I write to confirm that I would very much welcome a visit before term, as I mentioned. I am at Hogwarts through to September 1st. Come any time. Bring whoever you feel the occasion warrants." A.D. Harry read it twice. Bring whoever you feel the occasion warrants. An acknowledgement. A concession to the new reality. Deliberate phrasing, deliberate inclusion. Dumbledore never wrote a sentence without knowing what he was writing. He took both letters to Lucifer, who was in the library with coffee and what appeared to be a personal correspondence of his own, the kind written on paper that made the Hogwarts parchment look like it was trying too hard. Lucifer read the Hogwarts list and said nothing about it, which meant it was uninteresting. He read Dumbledore's letter and set it on the table and looked at it for a moment with the particular quality of focused thought that Harry had come to recognize, not quite suspicion, not quite satisfaction, more like a chess player observing that an opponent has made the move they expected. "He's calibrating," Lucifer said. "That's what I thought. He's deciding what he can offer you now that overt management is off the table. He's thinking about what you want, or rather, what he thinks you want, and preparing to offer a version of it." He looked up. "He'll offer you information. Not all of it. Not the parts that change your choices in ways he doesn't want changed. But enough to feel significant. Do we go? We go to Diagon Alley today. Hogwarts next week." He stood, closing the correspondence he'd been reading. "The school supplies are a good reason to be in London, and there are things in Diagon Alley I want to accomplish while we're there." He looked at Harry's training clothes. "Change into something else." Mazikeen, louder, directed at the corridor, "We're going out." From somewhere in the building, the sound of something being set down, then footsteps. Harry changed into jeans and a t-shirt that fit him, that was still a novelty, clothing that fit, clothing chosen rather than inherited, and found a jacket that the wardrobe had produced without being asked, dark green, the right weight for August in London. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and tried to find the person he'd been 6 weeks ago in the person looking back. He wasn't sure he could. They went to Diagon Alley through a method Harry hadn't seen before, not the leaky cauldron's back entrance, not the flue. The building had a door on the ground floor that opened, when Lucifer touched it, onto a narrow London alley that looked perfectly ordinary until you walked down it and turned right and found yourself somewhere else entirely. Mazikeen walked through without comment, as if this were simply a known feature of the world. Harry walked through and felt the air change, felt the particular compression of a magical space asserting itself over a mundane one, warm and humming slightly, like walking into a building where music is playing very quietly somewhere deeper inside. Diagon Alley in August was busy with the specific energy of school preparation, families moving in clusters, children trailing behind parents with the conflicted expressions of people who are excited about something they're also mildly dreading. The shops spilled color and noise into the cobblestone street, robes in windows, owls in cages, the clatter of cauldrons, the particular chemical smell of a potion supply shop mixing with the sweet overlay of Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. Harry walked into it and was immediately recognized. Not by everyone at once, it wasn't like walking onto a stage. It was the rippling thing, the thing he'd first experienced in the leaky cauldron a year ago, a wave of awareness moving through the crowd from person to person as they clocked the face, and then the scar, and then did the mathematics. Eyes landing on him. Conversations shifting register. A child tugging at a parent's sleeve. He'd spent a year learning to walk through that. He walked through it now with the same straight spine, the same slightly too direct eye contact that said he'd noticed and wasn't performing oblivion. What was different this time was what walked next to him. Lucifer didn't appear to be doing anything in particular. He walked in the same unhurried way he walked everywhere, one hand in his jacket pocket, his attention moving through the alley with what looked like mild interest. He wasn't broadcasting anything, wasn't projecting anything deliberate. And yet the crowd adjusted around him. Not the ripple of recognition, something more involuntary than that. The way people adjusted around a bonfire at night. They moved toward him and away from him in the same motion, wanting proximity and finding themselves at a respectful distance, and in that distance, in that adjustment, Harry found himself with more space around him than he'd ever had in Diagon Alley. Does that happen everywhere? Harry asked. Lucifer considered. Generally. I've learned to turn the volume down. Otherwise crowds become inconvenient. He glanced sideways. Today I've turned it up slightly. For me. You deserve to walk down a street without being squeezed, Lucifer said, without particular sentiment, the way he said most generous things, as if they were simply accurate observations rather than gifts. They went to Gringotts first. The bank was the same as Harry remembered, the long hall, the high ceiling, the goblins at their high desks, the particular atmosphere of concentrated financial authority that made even the bravest wizard walk a little more carefully. Harry waited in the queue and was seen by a goblin who introduced himself as Sharptooth with the brisk professional neutrality of someone who processed hundreds of people a day and found all of them equally unremarkable. Or that was how it started. Then Sharptooth looked up from the account number Harry had given him, looked at Harry, looked at the man standing behind Harry, and something changed in the goblin's face, not fear, nothing so simple. Something more like the recalibration of a very sharp mind encountering something outside its expectation. "Mr. Potter," Sharptooth said, and his voice had acquired a new precision. "And you are, to Lucifer." "His guardian," Lucifer said pleasantly. "I'd like to discuss his account access." "His current account access is standard miner's provisions." "Yes, I'm aware. I'd like to discuss changing that." He leaned on the desk with one elbow, which was not something people did with Gringotts tellers and which Sharptooth registered with a slight widening of the eyes. "I suspect there's more to the Potter accounts than the single vault Harry has been made aware of. I suspect there's a significant amount more, actually. And I'd like Harry to be made aware of all of it, with full access documentation, before he goes to school in September." Sharptooth was quiet for a moment. The goblin's dark eyes moved between Harry and Lucifer with a quality of assessment that Harry recognized. It was the same quality Mazikeen's assessments had. Looking for something real underneath the surface. "That would require a full estate accounting," Sharptooth said. "Such processes take time." "Yes." Lucifer straightened. "I imagine you can expedite it. I imagine there are mechanisms for that." He smiled at the goblin, the warm, exact smile. "I imagine that the Morningstar account, which has been with this institution since," he tilted his head slightly, "the 17th century, earns a certain degree of expedition." Sharptooth looked at him for a long moment. Then the goblin stood, with the crisp precision of someone who has made a decision. "If you'll follow me." The room they were taken to was private and small and paneled in dark wood. An account manager arrived with 2 leather portfolios and spread their contents across the table with the air of a person slightly tense about the reveal. Harry sat across from it all and let the information land. The main vault, the one with the small fortune in galleons he'd visited in his first year, was a minimal account. A holding account for immediate expenses, the account manager explained, established at the time of his parents' death. The actual Potter estate was held in 2 other vaults, a trust vault and a family vault, both requiring the family heir's majority or formal guardian authorization to access. There was also a black family instrument, a dormant interest through his mother's line, and a thing the account manager described as an irrevocable legacy instrument from the Evans family, Muggleborn but old-moneyed in the Muggle world, converted at death. Harry looked at the numbers for a long moment. "This has been sitting here," he said. "The estate has been accruing for over 10 years, the account manager confirmed. And no one," he stopped. Started again. "I've been sleeping in a cupboard." The account manager looked profoundly uncomfortable. Lucifer, beside Harry, said nothing and didn't need to. Harry looked at the numbers again and felt the specific quality of anger that was not hot but cold, the kind that came from arithmetic, from the simple subtraction of what had been and what had been possible, from the clean, cold distance between those 2 columns. "I want full access," he said. "Guardian authorization, and my own documentation. And I want it ready before school starts." "Of course, Mr. Potter," the account manager said, and pulled out forms, and Harry signed them with a steadiness he was proud of. On the way out of the bank, down the long marble steps, Mazikeen fell into step beside Harry and said, quietly and without preamble, "You handled that well. I wanted to put my head through the desk." "I know. You didn't." The sunlight hit them at the bottom of the steps, warm and full, Diagon Alley resuming its busy self around them. Harry breathed through the cold anger and let it become something smaller and more usable, not gone, just filed. He had time to be angry about the right things in the right order. Today was for getting what he needed. He bought his school books at Flourish and Blots without incident, which was to say he found everything on his list, paid for it from the small amount in his original vault, and was in the process of leaving when the incident happened. Draco Malfoy was coming through the door as Harry was going out. Behind Draco was a man Harry had never met but recognized immediately in the way you recognized patterns, the same blonde hair, the same deliberately composed face, but older and more refined, the way cruelty refined over time from bluntness to precision. Lucius Malfoy. He wore robes that announced themselves, a cane with a silver head, the particular carriage of someone who had never needed to apologize for the space they took up. Draco saw Harry and his eyes went to the scar first, which Harry expected, and then did the quick assessment that even Draco's 11-year-old social calculations required, noting what Harry was wearing, who was with him, what that meant. Harry watched the calculation happen and felt nothing particular about it. Potter, Draco said. Malfoy, Harry said. Brief. Sufficient. Then Draco's gaze went past Harry's shoulder and found Lucifer, and the calculation stopped. Draco Malfoy was not a timid boy, he had the confidence of someone raised to believe he was important, which was its own kind of courage and its own kind of blindness. But something in his face went quiet and careful in a way Harry had never seen from him. Lucius Malfoy had stopped as well. He was looking at Lucifer with an expression that was constructed. Harry could see the construction of it, the way a wizard of that caliber built expressions rather than had them, but something in the construction was under strain. Lucius. Lucifer smiled with the warmth of someone who knows someone and finds the knowing mildly entertaining. How pleasant. The alley has lovely weather today. Lucius Malfoy was a man who had been navigating the dangerous social terrain of British magical power for decades. He had survived a Dark Lord's fall, an inquiry by the Ministry, and the scrutiny of Dumbledore, and had come out of all of it intact through a combination of money, information, and the very precise application of charm. He was not, Harry thought, a man who found many situations unnavigable. He found this one briefly unnavigable. Mr. Morningstar, Lucius said, recovering smoothly enough that only someone watching specifically would catch the seam. I wasn't aware you had interests in the wizarding community. I have interests everywhere, Lucifer said pleasantly. Harry is my ward. That makes the wizarding world professionally relevant. He glanced at Draco in the way adults glanced at children, not dismissively, but with the acknowledgement that the child was a factor in the room. Draco. You're taller than last year. Draco stared at him. We haven't met. No. But I know your family rather well. A pause that was comfortable for Lucifer and not quite comfortable for anyone else. You should know that Harry is under my care now, which means that whatever social dynamics developed last year are going to need to be navigated with a degree of consideration previously not required. The pleasantness was consistent and warm, and underneath it was a quality of seriousness that had nothing to do with threat and everything to do with clarity. I'm not telling either of you what to do. You're children and you'll do what children do, which is ignore sensible advice and learn from experience. But your father, his gaze returned to Lucius, leveling there with a directness that made Lucius go very still, your father knows what it means when I'm in a situation. Don't you, Lucius? Something moved in Lucius Malfoy's face that Harry wouldn't have been able to name a month ago but could now. Recognition. And behind the recognition, a fear that was different in quality from ordinary fear, not the fear of consequences, but the fear of an absolute. We understand each other, Lucius said, and his voice was smooth and even, and only Harry, standing close, could tell the smoothness cost something. Wonderful. As always. Lucifer stepped aside and held the door open for the Malfoys to enter, which they did, Draco casting one last look at Harry that was complicated and new and nothing like the look he usually wore. On the pavement, Harry walked alongside Lucifer toward the next shop and thought about what he'd just seen. He's afraid of you, Harry said. Most people of his type have a record, Lucifer said simply. And everyone with a record, deep down, knows what the record is worth. Lucius Malfoy has made a very careful life around the idea that consequences are for other people. When he encounters someone who is, quite literally, in charge of consequences, he tilted his head slightly, the calculation shifts. Is that what you are? In charge of consequences? I'm in charge of particular consequences. A pause. Not all of them. I want to be clear about my role. I'm not omnipotent, I'm not everywhere, I'm not a safety net for every situation. I am who I am and I have the authority that comes with that, but Harry, he looked at him directly, I'm telling you this because I don't want you to feel invincible. I want you to feel capable. Those are different things. What's the difference? Invincible people stop paying attention. Capable people stay curious. He stopped in front of a shop with a sign that said wands, Ollivanders in faded gold letters. In here. Harry looked at the shop. I have a wand. You have a wand that is holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, that the wand maker told you was curious because it shares a core with Tom Riddle's wand. He held the door open. I want to talk to Ollivander. Inside, the shop was the same as Harry remembered, the towers of boxes, the slight smell of sawdust and something older than sawdust, the silence of a place that contained things waiting to be claimed. Garrick Ollivander appeared from between his shelves with the same quality he'd had a year ago, silvery eyes that saw more than they appeared to, the manner of a man who had spent decades learning that every person who walked through his door was interesting if you knew what to look for. He saw Harry. He looked at Lucifer. He went very still. Well, Ollivander said, quietly. That's not something I expected to see this week. Or any week, probably, Lucifer agreed, pleasantly. Garrick. I have some questions about the boy's wand. Ollivander looked at Harry with an expression that had shifted from the careful neutrality of a craftsman into something that was, not afraid, Harry decided. Reverent, maybe. Like a person standing at the edge of a very large thing and reassessing the size of it. The connection between Harry's wand and the Dark Lord's it's unprecedented in my experience, Ollivander said. He moved behind his counter as if the counter gave him something to do with his hands. I've made wands for 60-odd years. I've seen cores matched, cores refused, cores that surprised me. I've never seen a core shared between a living master and a living dark wizard with the specific history these two have. The implication is that the wand chose him for a reason that exceeds the usual mechanics, Lucifer said. Yes. I know. What else do you know about it? Ollivander looked at him with those silver eyes for a long moment. The wand chooses the wizard, he said. I've said it my whole life. But there are choices and then there are choices, ordinary affinity, and then the thing that's deeper than affinity. Harry's wand chose him in the deeper sense. He looked at Harry. The phoenix whose feathers are in both wands, Fawkes, belonging to Albus Dumbledore, gave only 2 feathers. Ever. In all the years I've known him to give, he gave 2. One to you, one to Tom Riddle. A pause. I've thought about what that means. I've thought about it for 11 years. What have you concluded? Harry asked. Ollivander looked at him with the look of a man who hasn't been asked directly in 11 years and finds the directness startling. I've concluded that the feather knew something the bird doesn't share with the rest of us. He paused. I've concluded that you two are the end of something. Or the beginning. And that those might be the same thing. Harry looked at the old man, this small meticulous craftsman who had spent decades in this shop working at the intersection of power and purpose, and thought about what it was like to carry knowledge around that no one wanted to hear. Thank you, Harry said. For telling me that. Ollivander blinked. Most people don't thank me. Most people probably aren't glad to hear it. The old wand maker looked at him for a moment with something that was almost warm. No, he agreed. They're not. Outside, the alley was starting to thin as afternoon came on, families trailing homeward with their purchases. Mazikeen had disappeared at some point near Gringotts and reappeared near Ollivanders with the timing that suggested she'd been doing something unrelated and parallel and that Harry was going to add it to the list of things to accept rather than examine. Florian Fortescue's, Lucifer said, looking in that direction. I want ice cream. Harry looked at him. You want ice cream? I want to sit in the sun in a public place and be a person for 20 minutes. A pause. Is that surprising? A bit. I like ice cream, Lucifer said, with the simplicity of someone stating a genuine preference. I've always liked ice cream. I was there when the Italians developed the first gelato and I thought at the time, yes, this is a significant contribution to the world. They sat outside with 3 bowls. Lucifer had a single scoop of something dark and complex, Mazikeen had what appeared to be espresso flavored with something that smelled slightly dangerous, Harry had 2 scoops of something bright and summer flavored, and sat in the August sun while Diagon Alley did its last hour of the day around them. Harry watched people as he ate. Watched them move past with their shopping, their children, their ordinary concerns. Watched the way some of them noticed him and adjusted their trajectories in the small involuntary ways of people who wanted to look but felt they shouldn't, or people who wanted to say something and didn't know how. A small girl stopped in front of the table and stared at Harry with the guileless directness of someone very young who hadn't yet learned that staring was rude. You're Harry Potter, she said. Yeah. My mum has a book about you. Harry considered this. What kind of book? She says it's about the war. She reads bits of it to me sometimes. The bit about your mum. The girl considered him with large dark eyes. Were you really a baby when it happened? 1 year old. That's very young, she said, with the solemnity of someone who understood that 1 year old was young because they had recently been that age themselves. Does it make you sad? Something in Harry's chest moved. Not painfully. Just moved. Sometimes, he said honestly. Mostly it makes me, I don't know her, but I know things about her. And that's something, I think. The girl considered this with great seriousness. Then her mother appeared at her shoulder and apologized with the specific embarrassment of a parent whose child has done something in public, and the girl was steered away looking back over her shoulder. Harry looked at his ice cream. You were good with her, Lucifer said. She was easy to be good with. She was just, honest. Children usually are. It's one of the things I find most interesting about them. He turned his spoon over slowly. The world spends a great deal of energy teaching people to be less honest. It calls the result maturity. Mazikeen, eating her espresso-flavored something, said without looking up, some of the dishonesty is necessary. Some of it, Lucifer agreed. Not as much as advertised. Harry scraped the last of his ice cream. The sun was lowering toward the rooftops of the alley, and the shadows were getting long and golden, and the street was quieting into something more relaxed, fewer children, more adults who'd stopped in for things on the way home from elsewhere. What was it like, Harry asked, being in Diagon Alley last year? The first time? He paused. I didn't know anything. I thought I was ordinary and nobody, and then Hagrid shows up and everyone in the Leaky Cauldron knows my name and, he stopped. I didn't know how to feel about it. I still don't, I think. Famous but anonymous, Lucifer said. Everyone knows the story, no one knows you. Yeah. That's a particular kind of lonely. Yeah. He looked at the table. Dumbledore said I was brave. In his end-of-year speech. He gave Gryffindor points for it, for me, and Ron, and Hermione. And everyone cheered. And I sat there thinking, you don't know me. You know the version of me that did the thing you wanted. You don't know what I was thinking about while I was doing it, or whether I was scared, or whether I did it because it was right or because I didn't know how to do anything else. Lucifer was listening. Not preparing a response, actually listening, the way he did, fully and with his whole attention. I think, Harry said slowly, working it out as he went, I've been angry for a long time about being seen wrong. And I've been angry about it quietly because no one asked." He looked up. "You ask. I find you interesting," Lucifer said simply. "Not the story. You." Harry held that for a moment. Then he nodded, once, and let it land where it needed to. On the way back through Diagon Alley toward the way out, with his bags of school supplies and the account documentation from Gringotts and the warmth of the afternoon still sitting on his shoulders, they passed the window of a second-hand shop selling magical artifacts, and in the window was a mirror, small, simple, unframed, with a worn silver backing. Not the mirror of Ariste. Just a mirror. Harry caught his own reflection in it as they passed. He looked like himself. He looked like a boy in a green jacket who'd had ice cream in the afternoon sun. He looked, he thought, like a person who existed outside of a story. That was new. They went back through the hidden alley, through the door, through the building and up in the buttonless lift, and Harry put his school supplies on the desk in the East Room and sat on the bed for a moment and thought about September and what Hogwarts was going to look like from this side of the summer. He thought about Quirrell's vacant position, defense against the dark arts, the most jinxed seat in the school, as Ron had told him with cheerful certainty. He thought about Dumbledore's letter and the visit they'd agreed to. He thought about the soul fragment in his scar and about Voldemort rebuilding himself somewhere. And then he thought about the girl in the alley and her mother's book, and about his mother's magic, old and deep and full of love that had turned out to be more durable than death, and he thought that the thing that made his particular magic interesting wasn't just the two-wand connection or the soul fragment or the prophecy. It was what Lucifer had said in the library. Emotional. Protective. It grows under pressure. He was about to go to a school full of pressure, run by a man whose management style he now understood in full. He had a piece of someone else's broken soul in his head. He had an enemy who was somewhere between metaphor and man, rebuilding from nothing. He also had, he thought, and the thought was new enough that he turned it over carefully, checking its weight, people. Not the abstraction of people. Not admirers. Not pieces on the same board. People who asked what he thought, fed him aggressively spiced food, took him for ice cream, taught him to fall correctly, told him the truth. He was going back to Hogwarts in 3 weeks. He was going back different. He took out his notebook and wrote for a while, and outside the east window London came on in its evening colors, amber and blue and the distant warm white of streetlights, and Hedwig came in through the window and sat on the desk and regarded him with the composed certainty of an owl who found her current situation entirely satisfactory. "Yeah," Harry told her. "Me too." She ruffled her feathers in the particular way that meant she agreed, or possibly that she wanted attention, and he reached out and scratched behind her ear and she made a soft sound and closed her eyes. He kept writing. Tomorrow they were going to Hogwarts. He had things to say to Dumbledore and he was going to say them, and Lucifer would be there, and the old man's careful warmth and long strategic view were not, this time, going to be the biggest thing in the room. He was, Harry thought, actually looking forward to it. Chapter 4, The Sorting of Things. Hogwarts on a September 1st was a particular kind of organized chaos, the platform, the train, the boats, the castle appearing over the lake like an argument for the existence of things that shouldn't be possible but were. Harry had done it once before and still found the approach across the water genuinely moving, the castle rising out of the dark with its lit windows and its towers and its very old, very serious magic pressing against the air like weather. He was in a boat with Ron and Hermione and Neville, same as last year, except that last year Harry had been a boy arriving at a place he didn't know, and this year he was a boy arriving at a place he knew and had thought carefully about, and the difference was the difference between walking into a dark room and walking into a room you'd memorized in daylight. Ron was in the middle of a story about the twins' most recent experiment with Floo powder that had involved their mother's prize begonias and a minor structural issue with the garden shed. Hermione was listening with the expression of someone who disapproved in principle but found the specifics difficult to resist. Neville was eating a piece of chocolate with the focus of someone who had learned that chocolate was reliable when other things were not. Harry was watching the castle and thinking about Dumbledore. They'd gone to Hogwarts the previous week, as planned. The meeting had been in Dumbledore's office, which was full of the same instruments and the same portraits and the same specific quality of accumulated authority and benevolence. Fawkes was there, asleep on his perch, one eye barely open. Dumbledore had offered Harry tea and biscuits and information. He'd told Harry things, real things, things that were true. He'd told Harry about the prophecy's existence, though not its content. He'd told Harry that Voldemort's defeat was incomplete, that the man was rebuilding in some form, that Hogwarts remained one of the safest places in Britain. He'd told Harry that his mother's sacrifice was irreproducible and extraordinary, that he had studied it for 10 years and still found new dimensions in it. All of this was true. Harry had listened with the attention of someone who had spent 3 weeks learning to distinguish between what was said and what was meant. What Dumbledore hadn't said was, "There is a piece of Voldemort's soul in your scar." What he hadn't said was, "I have always known this." What he hadn't said was, "The plan I have been building toward requires that at some point, in some form, you understand what you're carrying, but I have decided that now is not the time for you to know that, and the decision is mine." Harry had sat in the comfortable chair with his tea and looked at Dumbledore's kind eyes and thought, "You are telling me the things that point in the direction you want me to walk, and leaving out the ones that might make me walk differently." He hadn't said this out loud. Not because he was afraid of the old man, the summer had been thorough about that, but because Lucifer, in the corridor beforehand, had said, "Listen. Learn what he shows you by watching what he hides. An argument now costs you the access. Patience is a sharper tool." Harry had listened. Had learned. Had thanked Dumbledore for the conversation with the genuine warmth of someone who appreciated the true parts of it, because that was honest, and he was practicing honesty. Lucifer's conversation with Dumbledore had happened in a separate room and Harry hadn't been present for it, and when he'd asked afterward, Lucifer had said, "He wants to keep you. He genuinely believes his version of things is best for you, which is the most dangerous kind of wrong." A pause. "We came to an understanding. It will hold until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, we'll know." So here was Hogwarts again, across the black water. "You're quiet," Hermione said, next to him. "Thinking. Good thinking or bad thinking?" "Useful thinking." She considered this. "Is everything all right?" "The summer, you sounded fine in your letters, but letters can be, I'm good, Hermione." He looked at her and made sure she could see he meant it. "Actually genuinely good. I'll tell you about it properly when we're not in a boat." She looked at him for a moment with the particular precision of someone who was deciding whether to accept an answer or continue the thread of investigation. "You seem different," she said finally. "Probably. Not bad different. Good." He watched the castle approach. "I was thinking about second year." "What's in it?" "Well, the curriculum, not the classes." "What's actually in it?" He looked at the water. "Something's coming. I don't know what yet. But the sorting doesn't feel like the end of anything this year, it feels like the beginning." Neville looked up from his chocolate. "That's actually more ominous than I wanted for September." "Sorry," Harry said, and mostly meant it. The boats reached the shore. The sorting ceremony was new only for the first years, who filed in with the slightly dazed expression of people who had just traveled by magic for the first time and hadn't fully digested that the ceiling of this vast hall was showing them an actual sky. Harry watched them from the Gryffindor table with the feeling of watching something he'd experienced from the outside, both familiar and distant. Professor McGonagall was the same as ever, precise and contained, her tartan robes immaculate, her eyes moving across the new students with the assessment of a general reviewing troops she'd eventually be responsible for. The hat on its stool was the same disreputable hat. The candles were the same candles. The smell was roast potatoes and something sweet, the warm institutional smell of a building that had been feeding hundreds of people for centuries and knew how. The sorting went. Children walked up, nervous, sat, were named. Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, Slytherin. The hall cheered for its own each time. Harry watched and found himself thinking about what the sorting actually was, what it meant to take 11-year-olds and put them in boxes and then spend 7 years acting as though the boxes described them. He thought, I was put in a box. I am still being put in boxes. The boxes are just getting larger. Ron was explaining something to Neville about the Weasley family's relationship with Hufflepuff, which involved several cousins and a disputed incident at a Quidditch match. Hermione was watching the sorting with scholarly attention. Harry ate a bread roll and watched Dumbledore at the head table and waited for the year to start. The sorting finished. The feast appeared. The hall became the particular lovely chaos of several hundred hungry people, and Harry ate proper amounts and talked to Ron about whether the Gryffindor Quidditch team had any chance this year and to Hermione about the new defense against the dark arts teacher, who was someone none of them had seen before, a small, fussy-looking man in elaborate robes named Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, who was sitting at the staff table with the posture of someone who expected to be looked at. He's written 12 books, Hermione said, in a tone that was attempting neutrality and not quite succeeding because the tone wanted to be admiring and was fighting with her suspicion, which Harry thought spoke well of her. What kind of books? Harry asked. Adventure memoirs. His own. Defeating dark creatures, thwarting curses, traveling the world. She paused. He's very famous. Harry looked at Lockhart across the hall, at the practiced way the man held himself, the particular quality of his public face. He looked like someone performing someone. Harry had spent a summer learning to look at people clearly, and what he saw in Lockhart was a skilled actor who'd stopped needing a stage because he'd convinced himself the performance was real. We'll see, Harry said. After the feast, Dumbledore stood and gave his usual beginning-of-term remarks, rules, restrictions. The forest was forbidden, Mr. Filch had updated his banned items list, and welcome back. He introduced Lockhart with the mild warmth he used for new staff, and Lockhart gave a small wave to the hall that was the physical equivalent of a wink, and several students near Harry made appreciative sounds and several others made different sounds. Then Dumbledore looked briefly, across the hall, at Harry. Not long. Just a glance, and in the glance was acknowledgement, the same thing as the letter's careful phrasing. Bring whoever you feel the occasion warrants. He was adapting. He was still planning. He was, as Lucifer had said, never finished. Harry held the glance for a moment and then looked back at his pudding. The dormitory that night smelled of the same familiar stone and candle smell, and Harry's bed was the same bed with the same hangings, and Hedwig found the window immediately and was gone into the night, and Ron was telling a long story about something that had happened on the train to another second year named Dean Thomas, and Seamus was asleep already somehow, and Neville was rearranging his plants on the windowsill with the focused care of someone doing something that mattered. Harry lay in his bed and looked at the ceiling and thought, all right. Second year. Let's see what you've got. He went to sleep quickly, which was new. Sleep at the Dursleys had always been something to arrive at through patience, lying in the dark cataloging anxieties. Sleep at Hogwarts last year had been better but still uncertain, the castle's nighttime sounds unfamiliar. Sleep here tonight was like setting something down. He was out within minutes. The first week of classes had the texture of things establishing their patterns. Charms was Flitwick, who was small and enthusiastic and genuinely excellent, and Harry found he came back to it with a sharper attention than last year. He was looking at the theory now, not just the execution, asking what happened in the magic between intention and result. Transfiguration was McGonagall, who regarded Harry's new quality of attentiveness with the expression of someone who approved but was professionally required not to say so. Herbology was Professor Sprout in Greenhouse 2 with mandrakes, ugly, screaming baby-shaped plants that had to be repotted while wearing earmuffs, which Neville managed with extraordinary competence and Harry managed with the particular focus of someone who found concentration a reasonable solution to most problems. History of Magic was Binns, who was a ghost, and whose class Harry now used for quiet, focused note-taking on things from the library he wanted to think through. And then there was Defense Against the Dark Arts. Lockhart's classroom was decorated with his own image in a way that Harry found impressive for its brazenness, not posters, not promotional material, but framed photographs and moving portraits and enlarged covers of his books, the man himself in 12 different dramatic poses, all of them capturing the moment just before something impressive presumably happened. The man himself arrived into the classroom with the energy of a performer taking a stage, his smile deployed at full brightness. "Settle down, settle down." He said it with the voice of someone who expected not to need to say it twice. "Now, who can tell me, how many of you have read all 12 of my books?" Hermione's hand went up. Only Hermione's hand went up, and even Hermione looked slightly embarrassed about it, which Harry thought she shouldn't have, because at least she'd read them critically. Lockhart pointed at her with the theatrical delight of a teacher selecting his favorite student for a role he'd already cast. "Excellent. 10 points to Gryffindor." Then he moved on immediately, because the point had not been the answer but the display of having asked. He gave them a quiz. 42 questions about himself, his favorite color, his most frightening encounter, his proudest moment, the title of the book he'd found most difficult to write. Harry looked at the quiz for a moment and then looked at Lockhart, who was moving between desks with the pleasant confidence of someone awaiting tribute. Harry answered the questions accurately, because they could be answered accurately based on publicly available information, which meant they weren't testing knowledge, they were testing whether you'd read the books, which was not the same as knowing anything about defense against the dark arts. He wrote at the bottom of the quiz, "These questions test familiarity with a particular author's self-presentation. Could you share what today's lesson will involve in terms of practical defensive skills?" He handed it in and waited. Lockhart read through the results with expressions of pleased approval and mild theatrical disappointment. He reached Harry's at the end and read it with the expression of someone who had been handed something unexpected. His eyes moved to Harry. Harry looked back with the polite attention of someone waiting for an answer. "Mr. Potter." Lockhart smiled. The smile was still operating on all cylinders, which was impressive. Defense against the dark arts is a broad discipline that includes, critically, an understanding of context. Knowing your adversary's history, their favorite color? Harry asked. A beat of silence. 20-something Gryffindors and Slytherins all became very interested in their desks. Lockhart's smile did something with its edges. Knowing an expert's methodology, he continued, is a form of study. You learn from the best by understanding how they think. How do you think about the banishing charm? Harry asked. In the context of a corporeal dark creature. What's the practical sequence? Lockhart looked at him for a moment with something moving behind the bright eyes that wasn't quite what he usually put on his public face. We'll cover practical application as the term progresses, he said, and moved on. Ron leaned over. Bloody hell, he said, very quietly. He doesn't know, Harry said, equally quiet. You don't know that. I know enough. Harry turned back to his parchment and wrote at the top of a new page, self-taught. Good at self-presentation. Possibly never actually done any of this. He'd find out more as the term went on. That was fine. He had time. Potions was Thursday morning. Harry had thought about potions over the summer. Had thought about Snape, specifically, about what Snape was, the thing underneath the performance of contempt, the reason someone spent years being that specifically unpleasant to children. Lucifer had, in one of the evening conversations, talked about the difference between people who were cruel because cruelty was useful to them and people who were cruel because they were in pain and had organized their pain into a method. He hadn't been talking about Snape specifically. But the description had landed somewhere Harry recognized. He didn't like Snape. He was not going to pretend to like Snape. But he understood, now, that Snape's particular quality of focused hostility toward him was personal in a way that had nothing to do with Harry's actual choices and everything to do with his face, which was his father's face, and his mother's eyes, and the whole complicated history of what those things meant to a man who carried that history like something buried in the chest. That didn't make it acceptable. But it made it comprehensible. The dungeon classroom was cold and lit with low light and smelled of things that had been simmering for years in the walls. Snape entered in the way Snape entered rooms, sweeping, precise, with the air of someone who found the room insufficient and was managing the insufficiency through disdain. "Potter," Snape said, during attendance, and paused on the name in the way he always did, the pause that had 2 syllables of contempt in it. "Professor," Harry said. Snape looked at him. The pause extended. Harry looked back with the calm of someone who had spent a summer developing calm as a practical skill and found it robust. Something moved in Snape's expression, not softening, not anything as generous as that. More like an adjustment. A recalculation. Last year, Harry's calm in the face of Snape had been the fragile calm of a child not wanting to give him the reaction he wanted. This calm was different in texture, and Snape, who was an extraordinarily perceptive man, noticed the difference. He moved on through the register. They were making swelling solution. Snape described the process with his usual combination of technical precision and ambient menace, and Harry took notes and worked carefully and did not make any of the errors that Snape pounced on when he moved between tables. Neville knocked over his daisy roots, which Snape observed with the particular terrible sadness of a man who had expected failure and found it on schedule, and Harry, without looking up from his own cauldron, slid his extra daisy roots across the table toward Neville, who took them with a grateful look. Snape saw it. Said nothing about it. Toward the end of the class, Draco Malfoy, at the table behind Harry, said something to Pansy Parkinson that was low enough Harry didn't catch it but was directed at him. He could tell by the angle, by Draco's gaze moving across the room to him and then away. Pansy laughed, which was designed to be heard. Harry looked up from his cauldron, found Draco's eyes, and held them. Draco looked back. And what happened was not the smirk from last year, the easy casual cruelty of someone who'd always gotten away with things. What happened was a slightly more complicated look, the look of someone reassessing something they'd decided, running a new set of numbers through an old calculation, not quite arriving at a result. Harry had thought about Draco over the summer too. About what it was like to be Draco, to be raised in a particular story about who mattered and who didn't, what magic was and who deserved it, to have the story confirmed by every authority in your life, and then to meet someone who didn't fit the story and to have your father go very still in front of that person in Diagon Alley. He didn't like Draco either. But Draco was 12 years old and made of the things he'd been taught, and Harry thought there might be a person underneath the teaching who hadn't been introduced yet, even to Draco himself. He turned back to his cauldron. "Potter," Snape said, from the front of the room, as if he'd been watching, which he probably had. "The belladonna goes in last." "I know, sir. I haven't added it yet." A pause. "No," Snape said. "You haven't." And moved on. After potions, Ron was waiting in the corridor with the particular expression he wore when he had a theory about something. "Did Snape just, he told me I was doing it right. He told you you hadn't done it wrong. It's technically different but it basically means the same thing." Ron fell into step. "What happened with you this summer? Genuinely. I told you in the letters. You told me you had a new guardian and you were doing well and you'd explain." "That's not telling me." Harry looked at him. Ron Weasley was one of the most genuinely decent people he'd ever encountered, which was partly temperament and partly the particular product of being raised in a family where love was demonstrated rather than implied. He trusted Ron the way you trusted something that had already not let you down. "His name is Lucifer Morningstar," Harry said. He thought about how to say this in a Hogwarts corridor, not human. In the specific technical sense. Ron stared at him. "He's real," Harry said. "He's my guardian, it's legally binding in ways that made several ministry wizards need to sit down. He looked for the word, he listens. He tells me things. He's teaching me things." He paused. "He's not afraid of anything, and he's teaching me that I don't have to be either." Ron processed this for several seconds as they walked. When you say not human in the specific technical sense, I mean what I said. Right. More processing. He's on our side. If sides is the right word. Harry thought about it. He's on the side of things being true and people making real choices. That's basically our side. Ron was quiet for a moment more. Then, does he know about, you-know-who and all of it? He knows about all of it. Including things I didn't know until he told me. Like what? Harry glanced around the corridor, mostly empty, a few third years at the far end. Later. In the common room, when it's just us. Ron nodded with the practicality of someone who understood that some conversations needed specific geography. Okay. A beat. Is he scary? Harry thought about the courtroom. About the moment Dumbledore's presence had pressed against the air and stopped mattering. About Lucifer reading his paperback novel while Unspeakables examined a cosmic contract and looking entirely at ease. Not to me, Harry said. Ron nodded again, slowly. All right, he said, and Harry could see him filing and accepting and deciding that if Harry was all right, the situation was workable. That was one of Ron's most valuable qualities, the ability to trust someone's account of their own situation and work from there. How was your summer, actually? Harry asked. Beyond the begonias. Ron's face changed the way Ron's face changed when he was about to start properly talking, a particular unlocking. Right, so, Dad took us to this Muggle car boot sale, yeah, and, the story carried them through the corridor, up the stairs, out into the grounds for a quick circuit before dinner, because September was warm and the grounds were beautiful with it, the lake flat and silver, the trees starting the first whisper of autumn color. Hermione joined them near the Quidditch pitch and added several corrections to Ron's account of the car boot sale, and Ron added his objections to her corrections, and they all three sat on the grass in the afternoon sun, and Harry thought, here. This is also real. This is also mine. The Quidditch tryouts were the following week. Harry went. He flew. He was still the same on a broom, still the place where his body felt most at home, where everything narrowed to the immediate and the physical and the clean uncomplicated logic of speed and height and the snitch somewhere in the glittering air. He got Seeker again without discussion. Wood was pleased. Wood was always pleased about Quidditch in the way that only people who had organized their entire inner life around a sport could be. Harry accepted the position and the practice schedule and thought about flying the way he always thought about flying, as a thing that was his, that no one had given him for a reason, that he was good at simply because he was good at it. It was in the second week of September that Harry first noticed the whispers. Not about him, or rather, not primarily. About the castle. About the specific weight that Hogwarts carried this year, the particular quality of something waiting that Harry had mentioned in the boat on the first night without being able to name it. There were rumors, the way there were always rumors at Hogwarts, upper-year students talking about things that filtered down to second years as second-hand stories. Something about the Chamber of Secrets. Something about a legend, something opened 50 years ago. He heard it first from Percy Weasley, who mentioned it at breakfast with the authoritative dismissiveness of a head boy prefect dealing with what he considered lower-year nonsense, and dismissed it in a way that somehow made it more interesting. Harry mentioned it to Hermione. I've read about it, Hermione said immediately, because of course she had. It's a legend. Supposedly Salazar Slytherin built a hidden chamber in the school when he left, sealed it with a monster inside, and the heir of Slytherin will one day open it to purge the school of Muggleborns. She said it with the precision of someone reciting and the slight tension of someone for whom the last part lands personally. Most historians consider it apocryphal. Most historians considered a lot of things apocryphal, Harry said, until they turned out to be real. Hermione looked at him. Yes, she said, quietly. They did. He wrote to Lucifer that night. Not a panicked letter, a reporting letter, the kind they'd established over the summer, Harry keeping him informed of what was happening, Lucifer responding with information and questions and occasionally with observations that opened new angles on things. He described the chamber whispers, described Lockhart's ongoing demonstration of being entirely decorative, described Snape's recalibration, described the specific quality of waiting that sat in the castle's air. At the bottom of the letter he wrote, "Something's coming. I don't know what it is yet, but I can feel it the way you can feel weather changing. The scar is quiet for now. But the castle isn't." He sent it with Hedwig and watched her go, and then sat at the desk and opened his notebook and wrote for a while, because thinking on paper was different from thinking in his head, and he needed the difference. He wrote, "Last year I was running toward things without knowing what they were. This year I know more of the shape of it, which means I can choose how I approach it rather than just reacting." He wrote, "Dumbledore is waiting for me to need him. Snape is waiting for me to fail in the specific way that confirms what he expects. Lockhart is performing a part and doesn't know I've read the script." He wrote, "The chamber is real. I don't know why I think that, but I think it." He wrote, "I speak to snakes." That was the thing he'd been circling for a week, since the sorting feast, when he'd been walking past the greenhouses and found a small garden snake moving through the damp grass and had said something to it without thinking, and it had answered, and he'd stood there for a moment and then very deliberately not thought about it until he could think about it properly. He thought about it now. Mazikeen had told him, once, during a session on the roof, "Know what you are. Not what people say you are. Not what you're afraid you might be. What you actually are." He was someone who could talk to snakes. That was Parseltongue. That was the language of Salazar Slytherin, who had built a secret chamber and sealed a monster in it. That was a language associated with dark magic and hereditary connection to the worst of what Wizarding Britain had produced. It was also just a language. It was also just something he could do, something that felt natural and immediate, not dark, not frightening, just present. Like the magic that grew under emotional pressure. Like the flying. His. He wasn't Salazar Slytherin's heir. He was Harry Potter, who apparently had inherited a language from a soul fragment that wasn't his. He wrote that down. Read it back. Read it again. The soul fragment. He sat with that for a moment and then went to find Ron, because some things needed a person rather than a page. The common room was still busy at this hour, third years and fourth years at the tables, the fire going, the comfortable noise of people who had made a place their own. Ron was playing chess with Seamus and losing, which Ron accepted philosophically, and looked up when Harry came in. Harry sat down next to him and waited for the move to finish and then said, quietly, "I need to tell you something." "Okay," Ron said. "The soul fragment thing I mentioned in my letter, in my guardian's penthouse, he told me." Harry stopped, then started again. "There's a piece of Voldemort's soul in my scar. Has been since the night he tried to kill me." He kept his voice level. "Dumbledore knows. Hasn't mentioned it." Ron was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Seamus had looked up, then looked tactfully away. "That's," Ron said carefully, "a lot." "Yeah. Are you?" "I'm fine. I know what it is. There's a way to address it, eventually." Harry looked at the fire. "I'm telling you because you need to know. Because Hermione needs to know. Because if something happens this year, if the chamber thing is real, if Voldemort's involved in any capacity, you need to understand what you're working with." "What we're working with," Ron said. Harry looked at him. "You said what you're working with." "It's what we're working with." Ron met his eyes with the simple, direct honesty that was his most defining quality. "I know things are different this year. I know you've changed, over the summer, and I don't entirely understand all of it yet. But I'm here the same as I was last year." Harry held this for a moment. "I know," he said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Buy me a chocolate frog or something." Ron turned back to the chessboard. "You playing?" "Yeah," Harry said, and pulled up a chair. He lost 2 games and won 1, and it was past 10 before he went upstairs. At the window, Before sleeping, he looked out across the grounds and felt the castle around him, its age and its stone and the deep, complex accumulation of all the magic that had been done within its walls for 1,000 years. It was his school. It had been built with a darkness in it, and he was carrying a piece of someone else's darkness, and the year ahead was full of things that hadn't declared themselves yet. He was ready. Not armored. Not unafraid of everything. He was 12, some things still landed. But ready in the specific sense of someone who understood the terrain, who had real information and real people and real skills, and who had spent a summer being taught that his instincts were worth trusting. He went to sleep. Outside, in the grounds, in the dark, something moved through the pipes of a castle that had been keeping a secret for 50 years. The castle kept its silence. For now. Chapter 5, The Mirror and the Devil. The first attack happened on Halloween. Harry heard about it secondhand, the way most of the school heard about it, through the particular velocity of rumor that moved through Hogwarts when something had actually happened, faster and more certain than ordinary gossip, the kind of news that spread because people kept stopping in corridors and speaking in the low urgent registers of genuine alarm. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, had been found on the second-floor corridor near a flooded bathroom, stiff and hanging from a torch bracket by her tail, her eyes wide and turned to a flat silver. And on the wall above her, in something that looked like red paint and wasn't, the words, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Harry had been coming out of the Halloween feast when the crowd found the scene. He'd stood at the back of the press of students looking at the wall and the cat and Filch arriving and making a sound that was one of the worst sounds Harry had ever heard, private and animal and grief-stricken, the sound of someone finding something they loved in ruin, and he'd read the words and thought, there it is. Dumbledore was there within minutes, and McGonagall, and Snape, who looked at the wall with a quality of controlled intensity that might have been concern or calculation or both. Lockhart arrived and said something reassuring that landed wrong on every ear. Harry watched all of them and watched the wall and stored what he saw. Filch blamed Harry immediately, which was not surprising and not personal. Filch blamed Harry for most things on a basis of proximity and pre-existing dislike. What was more interesting was the quality of Snape's look in Harry's direction during the accusation, not accusatory, but evaluative. A look that was trying to determine something. Dumbledore said Mrs. Norris had been petrified, not killed. Mandrake restorative draft would revive her. He said it with the calm of a man with a plan, and Harry thought, of course he does. He wrote to Lucifer that night. The letter came back faster than an owl should have carried it from London, within hours, well before morning. The letter said, "The chamber is real, obviously. Basilisk, almost certainly, it's the classic choice, and Slytherin had a documented fondness for the dramatic. The writing on the wall is theater, but the threat behind it is genuine. Stay away from the plumbing. I mean that literally, the snake uses the pipes. If you hear something in the walls, you'll hear it differently from everyone else and you need to trust what you hear. I'm coming on Friday. L. Postscript, tell Mazikeen nothing happened yet. She'll want to come early and I'd like one more quiet week." Harry read it twice. Then read the postscript and understood, with the particular clarity of someone who had spent a summer in the same building as Mazikeen, that her version of coming early would be in some way significant and that Lucifer's desire for a quiet week was probably wise. He filed the letter in his notebook and went to potions. The castle moved into November with the anxious quality of an institution that has experienced something it can't explain and is managing the gap between official reassurance and private fear with the institutional tools available to it, more supervision in the corridors, curfews tightened, the teachers moving through the building with a collective heightened attention that was visible if you knew what you were looking at. Harry knew what he was looking at. He was also, quietly and with specific focus, investigating. Not dramatically, not the plunging forward that had characterized last year, where urgency had outpaced information at every step. He was asking questions, reading in the library, listening to the parts of conversations that happened in his vicinity and noting what they contained. He was, as Lucifer had suggested in the library that first summer week, following threads rather than chasing conclusions. He found, in Hermione's independent research, that there was a ghost on the second floor, a ghost who had died in a bathroom, who had been a student, who had been there the first time the chamber was opened 50 years ago. Moaning Myrtle, who haunted the out-of-order bathroom where Mrs. Norris's corridor met the flooded water on the floor that night. He found, through careful attention in History of Magic, where Binns was droning through goblin rebellions but Harry had taken to reading ahead in the books, that Salazar Slytherin's last known dispute with the other founders had been specifically about the education of Muggle-born students, and that the chamber was referenced in two primary sources as being located beneath the school, in the oldest part of the foundations, accessible through ancient means. He found, through listening to Snape's conversation with Filch in a corridor while walking behind them and remaining very quiet, that Snape was conducting his own investigation with a thoroughness that suggested he either knew more than he was sharing or was genuinely alarmed and covering it with competence. The question he kept returning to was, who is the heir? Parseltongue. Slytherin's heir. The soul fragment. He sat with this in the east bedroom when he was home for the weekend in late October. Lucifer had established a standing arrangement that Harry could travel between the school and the penthouse on select weekends via the building's door, which opened onto a space near Hogsmeade that was a 10-minute walk to the school's grounds, and work through the logic with the care he'd been taught. Voldemort was Slytherin's heir. Voldemort's soul fragment was in Harry's scar. The chamber was responding to something this year. Voldemort was formless and rebuilding, but pieces of someone could act even when the main body was absent. He wrote it down, the soul fragment. It's not passive. He wrote, it's doing something. Lucifer arrived on Friday as promised. He arrived via the front gate, which required negotiation with Filch and a letter from the headmaster's office, the logistics of which had apparently been handled in advance because Filch let him through with the expression of a man who had been given clear instructions and found them distasteful but unarguable. Harry met him at the castle doors and walked with him inside, and the castle did the thing it sometimes did, the quality of its attention shifted. Like a very large, very old dog registering the presence of something it couldn't categorize. The castle knows you're here, Harry said. The castle is extraordinarily old and its magic is deep enough to have preferences. Lucifer looked around the entrance hall with the appreciation of someone who found genuinely ancient things interesting. It's not concerned. Just, aware. McGonagall intercepted them at the bottom of the stairs with the precision of a woman who had been informed and was going to make sure the information was correctly applied. Mr. Morningstar, she said, in a tone that was professionally courteous and contained, underneath the professionalism, a quality of heightened attention. The headmaster will receive you at 3 o'clock. In the meantime, I'd like to look around, Lucifer said pleasantly. Harry will show me. I have no intention of interfering with anything. He looked at McGonagall directly, and something in that look was simple and clear and entirely without challenge, which was somehow more settling than any performance of deference would have been. Minerva. The school is doing well. Your influence on it is evident. McGonagall's professional composure did something small at its edges. Thank you, she said, in the tone of someone who had been given an accurate assessment and was accepting it rather than deflecting it. 3 o'clock. Room with the gargoyle. She walked away, and Harry noticed that she walked slightly taller than usual, and then noticed that he'd noticed this, and thought about what it meant that Lucifer's acknowledgement of a person consistently made them more themselves rather than less. He took Lucifer through the castle, through the main corridors, up the moving staircases, past the portraits that watched with more than painted attention, through the library's high-ceilinged calm. Lucifer walked through it all with the same quality he brought to everything, present without urgency, interested without performing interest, his attention moving through the space and finding things. He paused in the second-floor corridor. The Halloween message had been cleaned from the wall by Filch, obsessively and furiously, but the stones held the memory of it in a way Harry could feel and apparently Lucifer could too. He looked at the wall for a moment, then up at the ceiling, then down at the floor. Here, he said. Yeah. This is where they found the cat. The plumbing. Lucifer crouched slightly and pressed his palm flat against the stone floor. He stayed like that for a moment, very still, his eyes moving without focusing on anything visible. There's something very old down there. Older than the school. Slytherin built on top of something, I think, rather than building from nothing. He stood. It's asleep. Not deeply. Something woke it recently. The fragment. He looked at Harry. Tell me your theory. Harry told him, all of it, the logic chain he'd built over the past weeks, the soul fragment being active rather than passive, the chamber responding. Lucifer listened without interrupting and without the expression adults sometimes wore while listening to a child explain something, the patient tolerance that was actually waiting. He listened the way he always listened. When Harry finished, Lucifer said, "You're right about the mechanism. The fragment isn't controlling you, you're too integrated, too real a personality for it to gain purchase. But it generates. It radiates Parseltongue, dark affinity, Slytherin line resonance. The chamber is responding to what it's detecting, not to you." He looked at the floor. The question is who's directing it. Someone has to open the chamber deliberately. Yes. Someone who knows what they're doing. Yes. Lucifer looked at him. Someone who has had a long time to plan this. Harry thought about this for the walk to Dumbledore's office. Thought about it past the gargoyle, up the spiral staircase, through the door into the circular room full of its instruments and portraits and Fawkes's low perch. Dumbledore was at his desk. He stood when they entered, and the two men looked at each other across the room, and what passed between them in that moment was something Harry could feel without being able to name, not hostility, not warmth, something more complex than either. Two very old things in the same room, both of them aware of what the other was. "Lucifer," Dumbledore said. "Albus." Lucifer sat down without being invited, in the better of the two chairs, with the ease of someone who found the formalities of invitation slightly beneath the level of the conversation. "You know what's in the pipes." Dumbledore settled back into his own chair slowly. "I have suspicions." "A basilisk," Harry said. Both men looked at him. Dumbledore with something that was evaluating and careful. Lucifer with the brief expression of a teacher whose student has correctly anticipated the lesson. "The Chamber of Secrets contains a basilisk," Harry said. "Salazar Slytherin's monster, kept there for 50 years, awakened by something associated with a Slytherin line heir. Someone opened the chamber 50 years ago. Someone is opening it now." He sat down in the remaining chair without ceremony. "And you've known what's in there since at least the last time it was opened." Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment, and in the look was the familiar quality of a mind working at speed, assessing what had changed, how much Harry knew, what the new parameters were. Then, and this was what was different from any earlier conversation they'd had, the assessment finished and Dumbledore made a choice. "Yes," he said. "I have known for 50 years what the chamber contains." "And the heir?" 50 years ago?" A pause. "The student responsible 50 years ago was never publicly identified. The file was sealed." He looked at his hands. "The student was Tom Riddle." The room was quiet. Fawkes made a soft sound on his perch, low and warm. "He opened it then," Harry said. "He's connected to it now, even without a body." He looked at Dumbledore. "Is anyone else at risk of opening it? Does someone have to be the actual heir, or does something else? Someone would need to be capable of directing the basilisk," Dumbledore said. "Which requires Parseltongue." His eyes moved to Harry with the careful precision of someone arriving at the thing they've been building toward. "Harry, I know," Harry said. "I've known for a while." Dumbledore looked at him. Then at Lucifer. "He's known about the fragment since August," Lucifer said, without inflection. Something moved in Dumbledore's face. Not anger, he didn't do anger in this register. The controlled equivalent of it, a compression of expression, a slight tightening, the look of a man who had placed something in a particular location and arrived to find it had been moved. "I see. I'm not angry about it," Harry said, which surprised him slightly when it came out but turned out to be true. "I understand why you were managing it. I even understand why you thought that was right." He held Dumbledore's gaze with the steady directness he'd spent the summer acquiring. "But you don't get to manage it anymore. That changed in July." Dumbledore was very still. "The chamber," Harry said. "I want to find the entrance. I want to find it before whatever is happening escalates." The cat was petrified. Next time it might be a person. He paused. "I can hear the basilisk. In the pipes. I've been hearing it since Halloween, not voices, exactly, but a presence. Something alive and old and angry." "You shouldn't go into the chamber," Dumbledore said. "The basilisk's gaze is lethal." "I know. I'm not suggesting I go in unprepared." Harry looked at him steadily. "I'm suggesting I find the entrance, and then we work out what to do from there. Together." He let the word land where it needed to. "Instead of you working it out and telling me which direction to walk when you're ready." Fawkes made another sound from his perch. The portraits along the walls were very still. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Then, and it was the most unguarded thing Harry had ever seen from him, a brief, genuine unbuttoning, something underneath the composure surfacing for just a moment, the old man looked tired. Not strategically tired. Actually tired. "You're right," Dumbledore said. "That's a habit I've carried for a long time. It doesn't serve you." He looked at Fawkes. "The bathroom on the second floor. The ghost, Myrtle. She knows more than she's ever been asked." Harry nodded. "I'll talk to her." The meeting ended with a specific quality of change in the air between them, not resolved, not simple, but moved. Something that had been operating at a slant had been straightened by a few degrees. Not all the way. Not yet. But perceptibly. In the corridor outside, Lucifer walked beside Harry without speaking for a moment, and then said, "You did that well. He's not going to stop planning." "No. But he's going to start including you in the plans." A pause. "That's not nothing. It's not everything either." "No," Lucifer agreed. "It's not." Harry talked to Myrtle that evening, while Hermione and Ron ran interference outside the bathroom in case Filch or Peeves came near. He went in alone, because Myrtle was, in his experience, less forthcoming when there were people she could perform sadness for, and what he needed was actual information. Myrtle was in her usual state, hovering above the cistern in the last cubicle, her ghostly face carrying the accumulated grievance of 50 years of being dead in a school bathroom. But she was also, underneath the grievance, lonely in the specific way of someone who spent decades being managed by adults who only came to her when they needed something. Harry recognized it and felt the brief ache of recognition. He was direct about what he needed. She told him, in stages, and with the usual amount of theatrical self-pity woven through it, that she had died in this bathroom, that she remembered the moment, that something had looked at her. She described the last thing she'd seen, two great yellow eyes appearing from around the sink. Harry looked at the sink. It was the one in the center, larger than the others, a little older, with a small serpent engraved on the tap. He crouched in front of it and looked at the serpent and thought about what Lucifer had told him about his magic, emotional, protective, grows under pressure, and thought about the basilisk in the pipes, old and angry, following a voice that resonated through 50-year-old stone. He spoke in Parseltongue. Not loudly. Not for performance. Just clearly and with intention, the syllables that came easily when he let them, the language that was his the way his scar was his, not chosen but present. The sink moved. Not dramatically. Carefully, deliberately, the copper pipes groaning, the stone rotating, the basin sliding aside to reveal a pipe below, large enough to slide into, dropping down into the dark. The smell that came up from it was old and wet and green, the smell of standing water and old stone and something alive deep underneath. Harry didn't go down. He sat back on his heels and looked at it and thought about everything he knew, and then he closed the entrance, speaking to it, and it listened, and went to find Ron and Hermione. They came back with him. Hermione took notes. Ron looked at the sink with an expression of resigned brave practicality. They agreed that this information went to Lucifer first, and then to Dumbledore second, and that no one was going down the pipe without a plan and equipment and not being 12 years old. November deepened. The attacks continued. 2 Gryffindor students were found petrified in early November. Colin Creevey, a first-year who had been taking photographs of everything with a Muggle camera, was found on his way back from the library, his camera melted shut and the film ruined. A Hufflepuff named Justin Finch Fletchley was found near the greenhouse 3 weeks later, along with nearly headless Nick, whose near-decapitated state apparently offered some protection from the full effect of the gaze. After Justin, the school's fear acquired a new edge. The whispers were louder. The Slytherin heir narrative was circulating, and Harry's name was in it. The Parseltongue, everyone knew about the Parseltongue now, because he'd spoken it at a dueling club that Lockhart and Snape had organized with the best of theatrical intentions and the worst of practical ones, and a snake had been conjured and Harry had said something to it and half the school had heard it and come to their own conclusions. He'd expected this. Had been expecting it since the moment on the dueling platform when the snake reared toward Justin and the Parseltongue had come out. What he hadn't expected was how quickly certainty filled the gap where evidence should have been, how completely some of his classmates moved from Harry spoke to a snake to Harry is Slytherin's heir to Harry attacked Justin as if these were logical steps rather than leaps. He walked through the resulting social weather with the composure of someone who'd had practiced walking through social weather, and with something additional now, the knowledge that their conclusions were wrong, and that wrong conclusions told you something about the people who held them, not about you. Ron and Hermione didn't waver, which he hadn't expected them to and was grateful for anyway. Draco Malfoy, during this period, was conspicuously enjoying himself, or performing enjoyment, at least, making air of Slytherin jokes at Harry's expense with the theatrical confidence of someone who didn't believe what he was saying but found the saying of it useful. Harry watched this performance with the attentiveness of someone learning something. He caught Draco alone near the library one afternoon, not by design, by circumstance, both of them reaching a shelf at the same time and finding themselves the only 2 people in the aisle. Draco's expression went through 3 things in quick succession: automatic sneer, a slight complication of the sneer, and then something more neutral that wasn't quite his public face. "You don't think I'm doing it," Harry said. Draco looked at him. "What?" "The attacks. You don't actually think it's me?" A pause. "You're Parseltongue, you know that doesn't mean what you've been saying it means. You're not stupid, Malfoy." Harry kept his voice even, not hostile, not performing anything. "You're smart enough to know the heir narrative is more complicated than that. You've been saying it because it's useful, not because you believe it." Draco stared at him with the look of someone who has been accurately described and is deciding how to feel about it. "Whoever is opening the chamber," Harry said, "is going to get someone killed. Maybe several people. And then it stops being a story everyone's enjoying and starts being something else." He looked at Draco directly. "If you know something, if your family's history gives you information about what's in that chamber or who might be directing it, that information is going to matter." Draco's face was doing the complicated thing again, the thing Harry had first seen in Diagon Alley, the calculation running through new information with old assumptions, not arriving cleanly. "I don't know anything," Draco said. "About the chamber." Harry held his gaze for a moment, reading it. True, he thought. Or mostly true. He doesn't know. But he suspects something. "All right," Harry said, and stepped back from the shelf with his book. "But if that changes," he didn't finish the sentence. He walked out of the aisle and down the library corridor and didn't look back, because the thing he'd left behind, the question without a question mark, was doing its job better without elaboration. It was in the first week of December that the mirror of Ariste appeared in the corridor on the 7th floor. Harry found it by accident, which was either accident or the castle's doing. He'd never quite decided how much the castle arranged things on purpose, but the mirror had definitely not been in that corridor the day before, and definitely was there the evening he walked past it on the way back from an astronomy observation. He stopped. He'd seen the mirror before, of course, had stood in front of it for hours in his first year, had watched his family inside it with the specific painful sweetness of seeing something that should have existed and didn't. Dumbledore had moved it after he found Harry there, and Harry had thought of it as gone. It was not gone. It was here. He stood in front of it and looked at what it showed him. Not his family this time. Not his parents, not the crowd of red-headed strangers that had been his extended family in that first vision. The mirror showed him the Hogwarts grounds in summer, and in the grounds was a group of people. Ron, Hermione, some others he recognized and some he didn't yet. Mazikeen, sitting on the steps to the entrance, sharpening something with the focused contentment of a person whose afternoon is going well. Lucifer standing slightly apart, looking at the sky, and though his expression was only visible in profile it was settled. The specific quality of settled that Harry had never seen on anyone's face in his first vision, which had been all yearning. And Harry himself was in it, in the mirror, standing in the middle of it all, not at the edge, not apart. Just in it. Present. Belonging to the scene the way the scene belonged to him. He stood there for a moment, and the mirror showed him this, and he thought, that's not what I want. That's what I already have. He stepped back from the mirror. That was when he heard the footsteps. Quirrell's class had ended in October with the man's departure, or rather, with the revelation of what had been under the turban, and the battle in the forbidden third-floor corridor, and the end that had seemed final but wasn't, because Tom Riddle was never simply ended. But there was no Quirrell here. The footsteps were slower, more deliberate, and they carried a quality of intention that tightened Harry's attention immediately. He turned. Ginny Weasley stood in the corridor, and she was holding something, a small black diary, old, its cover worn, and she was holding it with the slightly dazed expression of someone sleepwalking while awake. Her eyes were open but not quite focused. In her other hand was a wand, not her own, too long, wrong wood, and it was pointed at the mirror. Harry understood in one swift moment of complete clarity what he was looking at. He kept his voice very quiet. Ginny. She looked at him, or looked in his direction, but the eyes didn't quite land. He says the mirror shows what people want, she said, in a voice that was hers and wasn't. He says if I show it to him he can feel it. He says he needs to see it. Who does? Her free hand tightened on the diary. Tom. Harry's scar pulsed. Once, sharp, hot. He stepped between her and the mirror. Not aggressively, just moved to stand in the space between them, and the wand in her hand adjusted toward him, and he looked at it and then at her face, and he spoke clearly and directly and in Parseltongue. Not to her. Not to the wand. He spoke to the diary. He didn't know what he was doing, precisely. He knew it was worth trying. He knew the fragment in his scar was responding, could feel it, an awareness, a presence, like hearing a voice in the next room. He knew that whatever was in the diary recognized the same language and that recognition was a door. The door opened. The diary went cold in Ginny's hand. She made a sound and dropped it, blinking, and suddenly she was just Ginny Weasley, 11 years old, standing in a corridor holding a wand that wasn't hers, looking at her empty hand and then at Harry with the beginning of terror in her face. Harry, she said, in her actual voice. Yeah. He crouched and picked up the diary from where it had fallen, and the moment he touched it he felt it, the presence, compressed and cold and furious, a personality pushing against the constraints of paper and ink, something that had been building itself in this girl for months and was still building even now. He wrapped his robes around it without putting his bare hand on the cover again. Are you all right? He asked Ginny. She was shaking. I keep losing time, I don't know, you're all right. It's not your fault. He stood and looked at her with the directness he'd been learning all year. None of what's been happening is your fault. Something was using you. That's finished now. He held up the robes-wrapped diary. This is finished. She stared at it with the look of someone recognizing the source of a nightmare. What is it? A piece of someone who shouldn't exist anymore. He looked at the diary and then looked down the corridor toward the stairs. I need to get this to someone. Can you get to the Gryffindor common room? She nodded, still shaking but focusing. Go directly. Don't stop. Your brother's in the common room, tell him I'll explain everything. He met her eyes. Ginny. You're brave. You've been carrying something terrible and you're still standing. That matters. Something in her face steadied. She nodded again, properly this time, and walked away down the corridor, and Harry watched her until she was out of sight and then turned and started walking very fast in the other direction. He sent a Patronus. He'd learned the Patronus charm from one of Lucifer's books, in the library, on an evening in late October, had cast it 3 times before it held, and when it held it was a stag, full and silver and large, and it had run across the penthouse main room and Lucifer had looked at it for a long moment before saying anything. He sent the stag Patronus now with a message in it, 3 words, diary. Come now. He carried the diary to the Ollery, which was cold and smelled of feathers and wind, and he sat on the floor with the diary across his knees and waited and did not unwrap it and thought about the voice in it, Tom Riddle, 16 years old, preserved in paper and ink and hatred, building himself in an 11-year-old girl's memories for 7 months, learning her, consuming her, feeding on her trust. He thought about what Lucifer had said in the flat summer night, about Tom Riddle, a man who was never interrupted. Harry had interrupted him. The Ollery door opened and Lucifer came through it, not by broom or owl or fire, but through the door, which meant he'd been in the castle already, which meant he'd arrived before the Patronus, which meant he'd known, or sensed, or the castle had told him something through its ancient and opaque methods. He looked at Harry on the floor and then at the robes-wrapped thing across his knees. Tom Riddle's diary, Harry said. He's been using Ginny Weasley. She's all right. The diary is, he looked at it, there's something in it. You can feel it. Lucifer crouched in front of Harry and looked at the wrapped diary with the focused attention of someone reading something that wasn't written for human eyes. His expression went through things that Harry couldn't follow, not fear, never that, but a kind of close, particular assessment. A Horcrux, Lucifer said quietly. Harry looked at him. What's a Horcrux? What you said that first morning at breakfast. Lucifer looked at him steadily. When a person tears their soul apart and hides the pieces in objects, to anchor themselves to life past the point of death. This, a gesture at the diary, is one piece. He paused. There are more. Harry held this. How many more? I don't know yet. More than 1, fewer than 8. That's the range Riddle would have found acceptable, given his documented interests and psychological patterns. He sat back slightly. This is what Dumbledore hasn't told you yet. This is the full shape of the problem. He knows about the Horcruxes. He's been working on it for years. Lucifer looked at the diary. He's been finding them, one by one. And he has a plan for the last one. He looked at Harry, and his eyes were direct and steady and the warmth in them was the real kind, the kind that didn't cost anything to look at. Harry looked back and said, the last one is in my scar. Yes. The Ollery was quiet. Below the window, the Hogwarts grounds were dark and snow-dusted, the lake black, the sky above them full of the specific quality of winter stars, cold and clear and older than every problem Harry had ever had. He sat with this information and didn't fall apart, which was something, and didn't pretend it was fine, which was also something. What happens to me, Harry said, when it comes out? That, Lucifer said, is the question your headmaster has been working very hard to avoid. He was quiet for a moment. The traditional method would require you to die. Briefly. He said the word briefly with a deliberateness that suggested it was doing real work. That's Dumbledore's plan. A calculated death, Riddle's killing curse completing what it failed to finish the first time, the fragment destroyed, and then, he tilted his head, the blood protection. Your mother's magic, still running in you. It should bring you back. Should. Probability is extremely high. He paused. It's not my preferred approach. What's your preferred approach? There are older methods. Lucifer's voice was careful, precise. Methods that don't require your death at all. Extraction rather than destruction. It's more complex, more costly in terms of preparation, and it requires my direct involvement. He looked at Harry with the full weight of his attention. I've been working on it since August. I didn't tell you earlier because some knowledge changes people's behavior in ways that make the knowledge counterproductive. But you're asking directly, now, after everything you've just done, and you deserve the direct answer. Harry looked at him. You've been planning a way to get it out without killing me. Yes. Since August. Since before August, actually. A slight pause. Since the courtroom, if I'm being precise. There are things I decided about your future before you decided them yourself, Harry, and I want to be honest about that. I decided you weren't dying on a technicality. I decided that before I knew you. I've decided it more firmly since. He met Harry's eyes. That's not management. That's a position. You're allowed to have a different one. Harry looked at the diary and then at the stars and then at the man crouching in front of him in an orrery at midnight in December at Hogwarts, who had arrived in a courtroom in July and said the boy made a genuine appeal in genuine distress and meant it. Same position, Harry said. Not dying on a technicality. Lucifer stood and held out his hand. Harry gave him the diary. Lucifer held it, the wrapped, robes-covered thing, and the diary stopped radiating its cold, furious presence, just like that, as if whatever was in it had put something away. I'll deal with this, Lucifer said. You go back to your common room. There will be questions tomorrow, Dumbledore will want to talk to you. Tell him the truth about what happened. All of it. He looked at Harry once more. You did well tonight. You did very well. Harry descended from the orrery into the castle, into the warm stone corridors, past the portraits that were mostly asleep and the ones that weren't that watched him pass with the attentiveness of old things recognizing something worth watching. He climbed to Gryffindor Tower and spoke the password and walked into the common room and found Ron sitting on the couch in front of a dying fire and Ginny wrapped in a blanket next to him. Ginny looked up when Harry came in. Her color was better. She still had the look of someone who had come back to themselves after being away, the slight off-centeredness of a person still finding their edges. She told me, Ron said. He was doing the thing he did when he was frightened, holding himself very still, his voice very level, keeping the fear in rather than out. The diary. Tom. All of it. It's dealt with, Harry said. Lucifer has it. Ron nodded, slowly. Is she safe? Is it out of her? She's safe. Harry sat down on the armchair across from them. He looked at Ginny. You should sleep. Tomorrow we'll have a lot of people asking you questions. Ginny looked at him with the eyes of someone who had just survived something they hadn't known they were surviving. You spoke to it, she said. In Parseltongue. To the diary. It let go. Whatever it had on me, she stopped. Why did it work? Harry thought about this. Because I wasn't asking. I wasn't trying to banish it or fight it. I was just speaking. In a language it recognized. Something about that, he looked at his hands, I think it's what Lucifer keeps saying. My magic is emotional. It responds to genuine things. And whatever I said to it was genuine. What did you say? He thought back to the words, the serpent language, the shapes it made in his mouth. I told it, he said slowly, that it was a fragment. Not a whole thing. That it was a piece of something broken, trying to pretend to be complete. He paused. I think it knew I was right. The fire was very low now, the common room otherwise empty. Ginny looked at the cold grate and then back at Harry, and something in her face was young, and tired, and starting to be all right. Thank you, she said. You didn't need saving, Harry said. You'd been fighting it for months. You just needed someone to deal the last part. Ron looked at him for a moment and then looked at the fire. So, he said. When you said something was coming this year. Yeah. This was it. Part of it. Harry leaned his head back against the chair. There are more pieces like the diary. More Horcruxes. And Dumbledore's been hunting them alone. He closed his eyes. We're going to need to talk about that. All of us. Hermione too. Tomorrow, Ron said. Tomorrow, Harry agreed. He sat in the armchair while the fire went to embers and Ron and Ginny went upstairs, and he thought about the mirror and what it had shown him, not the future, not desire, but the present. What he already had. And he thought about the diary and what was in it and what Lucifer had called it, and he thought about pieces of a soul scattered through the world and a man who had made himself monstrous trying to avoid death. He thought about his scar, and the fragment, and the plan Dumbledore had been carrying quietly for years, and the different plan Lucifer had been building since the courtroom. He thought, I am not a piece on a board. I am not a sacrifice to be made or a weapon to be aimed. He thought, I am Harry Potter, and I have people, and I have information, and I have never once walked away from something that needed facing. He went upstairs to bed. Outside, the snow was falling quietly on Hogwarts, filling the grounds and the eaves and the hollows between the stones, and somewhere far below in the pipes, the basilisk slept, and the castle held its 1,000-year silence. And London was warm in the direction of the compass that held a penthouse where a very old being was dealing with a very old piece of darkness with the focused competence of someone who had been waiting for the opportunity. The stars above the enchanted ceiling turned on their ancient axes. Second year was far from over. Chapter 6, What the Devil Keeps. January came in cold and clear, and with it came the reckoning. Not all at once. The reckoning was not a single event but a series of things arriving in sequence, each one following from the last with the particular momentum of a year that had been building toward itself. Harry had learned, over the summer and through the term, to feel the shape of things coming, not prophecy, not magic, just the particular attention of someone who had stopped trying not to know what was in front of them. The mandrakes were almost mature. Madame Pomfrey had said so in the second week of January, with the clinical satisfaction of someone watching a long-running process arrive at its conclusion. Colin Creevey and Justin Finch-Fletchley and nearly headless Nick would be revived within the month. The school breathed differently with this news, a slight loosening, a reduction in the ambient fear that had been tightening since Halloween. What the school didn't know was what Harry knew. What Harry knew was sitting in his notebook in the east bedroom in its organized entirety, the Horcruxes, the diary's destruction, Ginny Weasley's 9 months of having her trust eaten by a piece of Tom Riddle's 17-year-old personality, and the shape of Dumbledore's long plan meeting Lucifer's longer one. What Harry knew was that the diary being gone was not the end of anything, just the removal of one piece from a board that still had several pieces on it. He'd had the conversation with Hermione and Ron in the first week back. They'd gone to Hagrid's, because Hagrid's was the place at Hogwarts where conversations happened that the castle's corridors weren't quite the right geography for, too warm, too full of the specific comfort of someone who didn't have any agenda beyond making tea and listening. Hagrid himself had sat with them and listened and said blimey at intervals and had not tried to manage any of it, which Harry thought was one of Hagrid's most underrated qualities. Hermione had taken in the Horcrux information with the expression she wore when she was processing something that contradicted her existing framework, the brief reorder, the rebuild, the acceptance of the new structure. Then she'd said, so Voldemort has multiple anchors to life. A statement, not a question. Then, how many? And Harry had told her what Lucifer had said about the range, and she'd gone quiet in the particular way of someone who had already started doing research in their head. Ron had said, at the end of all of it, "So what do we do?" "We help Lucifer and Dumbledore find them," Harry said. "They're both looking. We have things they don't, access to the school, access to students who talk, access to places they can't go without it being noticed." He looked at both of them. "And we stop pretending this is something that happens to me and then gets resolved. It's not. It involves all of us, and we should all know what we're doing and why." Hermione had nodded immediately. Ron had nodded with the slightly resigned expression of someone who had already known this was coming and had decided ahead of time to be fine with it. That was January. Then February arrived and Lucifer came back. He arrived on a Tuesday with the building door method, turning up in the entrance hall in his usual composed way while a group of third-year Hufflepuffs parted around him with the involuntary spatial adjustment Harry had long since catalogued. He found Harry coming out of transfiguration and fell into step beside him as if they'd planned it, which Harry had stopped assuming was coincidence when Lucifer did it. "Diaries dealt with," Lucifer said, without preamble or greeting. "Dealt with how?" "The soul fragment is gone. The object is inert." He said it with the clean finality of a task completed. "I won't go into the specific mechanism. It involved things that don't translate usefully into your current frame of reference and you'll understand them better in a few years. What matters is that one Horcrux is gone and it's gone completely." Harry absorbed this. Around them, the corridor was busy with the post-class traffic of students moving between lessons. "Dumbledore should know. I've told him." A brief pause. "He was, I think, hoping to destroy it himself. There's a specific method he'd identified and he'd been building toward a moment. I've disrupted the sequence." The phrasing was neutral, neither regret nor satisfaction, just accuracy. "Is he angry?" "Not angry. Recalibrating." Another pause. "He told me something when I told him about the diary." He confirmed the number. 6 Horcruxes total, plus the fragment in your scar. 7 pieces of a soul, which is the number Riddle selected for specific reasons relating to magical theory and an unhinged personal mythology about immortality. He glanced at Harry. "1 is gone. 1 is in your scar. 4 are out there. 1, a slight shift in his expression, is in a cave on a cliff face on the coast, in a boat surrounded by inferi, at the bottom of a lake of dead things. Dumbledore knows where it is." Harry looked at him. "He's going to go alone." He was going to go alone. Was. "I've expressed an interest in accompanying him," Lucifer said, with the particular pleasantness he used when his expressions of interest were not fully separable from decisions already made. "He was, I think, intending to bring you at some future point, in some capacity that I find," he chose the next word carefully, "inconsiderate. He was going to take me because the blood protection on the cave requires a blood sacrifice to open," Harry said. Lucifer stopped walking. He turned to look at Harry with an expression that was briefly unguarded in a way that was rare enough to notice, not alarm, but something that was, Harry thought, the nearest Lucifer came to it. "When did you work that out?" Lucifer asked. "Library. There are records of similar blood-based concealment magics going back 3 centuries. They require willing sacrifice from someone with significant magical heritage to break the outer ward." Harry had found this 2 weeks ago and had sat with it for a while before adding it to the notebook. He wasn't going to ask me, was he? He was just going to need me there, and the situation would require it, and it would happen without being something I agreed to. A long moment. Then Lucifer said, very evenly, "No. He wasn't. And you're not going to let that happen." "I am categorically not going to let that happen." The pleasantness in his voice had dropped away into something flatter and more absolute. "The blood ward can be opened by other means. Older means, which require rather more of me and rather less of anyone bleeding unnecessarily. So we go together, Harry said. The three of us. Lucifer looked at him. You're not asking. No, Harry agreed. I'm telling you what's right. You told me in the courtroom, free will, proper free will, not the kind where the best options have already been removed. This is one of the options. I'm exercising it. Lucifer held his gaze for a long moment with the full attention that his gaze carried, the weight of something immeasurably old looking at something very young and finding it, clearly and genuinely, remarkable. All right, he said. We go together. But you do exactly what I say when we're there, because the inferi are not something your current skills are sufficient for alone, and I will not watch you discover that lesson the hard way. Agreed, Harry said. And you tell your friends where you're going. Also agreed. They walked on down the corridor. A second-year Gryffindor named Oliver nearly walked into Lucifer, recovered, and spent the rest of the corridor walk slightly sideways from them out of involuntary instinct. Harry barely noticed any more. There's something else, Harry said. There usually is. Dumbledore's been finding the Horcruxes gradually over years. He has a method, memories, research, the pensive. He looked at the floor as they walked. He's been doing it alone, and it's taken him years, and he's only found the location of one. If there are 4 out there besides the cave one, yes, Lucifer said. I know. A pause. I have a different method available to me. Less patient, more direct. He looked thoughtful. I know what Riddle valued. I know how a mind like his operates. I've been watching minds like his for a very long time. The things he chose to house his soul in weren't arbitrary. They were significant to him personally, objects with a particular history and weight. Do you know what they are? I have strong suspicions about 4 of them. One is in the possession of a family you've met. He glanced at Harry. Lucius Malfoy has been carrying a Horcrux without fully understanding what he has. The diary was supposed to be in his keeping. He gave it to Ginny, which was careless of him, and suggests he treats the objects as tools without understanding their full nature. Harry thought about Diagon Alley. The alley outside Flourish and Blots, Lucius Malfoy going very still in front of Lucifer, the calculated composure with the fear underneath it. He gave it to Ginny deliberately, Harry said. She didn't take it accidentally. No. He used her to reopen the chamber, a political move, meant to embarrass the Ministry and specifically Dumbledore, possibly to reactivate the basilisk for his own purposes. He didn't know or care what it was doing to an 11-year-old girl in the process. A pause. Draco was at school while this happened. Harry thought about Draco in the library aisle. The complicated calculation. The thing that hadn't quite arrived yet. He didn't know, Harry said. Draco. No, Lucifer agreed. Children very rarely know the full weight of what their parents are carrying. He said this without particular inflection, but with a quality of understanding that suggested the statement extended beyond Draco Malfoy. They went to see Dumbledore that afternoon, the 3 of them, Harry, Lucifer, and Dumbledore in the circular office, and had the most honest conversation that Harry had ever had in that room. Lucifer put everything on the table, the 4 suspected Horcruxes, their likely locations, the cave and the specific plan for reaching it, and the fragment in Harry's scar and the extraction method that did not require Harry's death. Dumbledore listened to all of it with the quality of someone hearing a story they knew most of and finding the gaps filled in. When Lucifer finished, the old man was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, February's thin light moved across the grounds, cold and pale. The extraction method you describe, Dumbledore said carefully. It's not something I'm familiar with. No. It requires access to things you don't have access to. Lucifer's voice was patient and matter-of-fact. Which is why Harry is my ward and not yours. Dumbledore looked at Harry. And the look was honest. More honest than most of the looks they'd exchanged in this room, fewer layers in it, the management reduced to something closer to the real person underneath. I planned for you to die, Dumbledore said. The words were direct in a way that cost him something. Harry could see it cost him. Not wastefully. Not carelessly. I believed it was the only way. I've believed it for 11 years, and I built everything around that belief. A pause. I want you to know that I've questioned it. I've questioned the ethics of it many times. I've always arrived at the same conclusion: the greatest good, the most lives saved, the defeat of something that cannot be allowed to continue. He stopped. That is not a comfortable thing to say to a child. It may not be forgivable. Harry sat across from him and felt the words land, not like blows, not with the hot shock he might have expected. They landed like cold water. Clear and real, and the temperature of truth. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, Harry said. It's not fine. 11 years of my life were built on a plan that ended with me as a necessary casualty. He kept his voice level. But I also know that you believed in what you were doing. And I know that you've been alone with this for a very long time, and alone with it in a way that probably made it seem more necessary than it was, because there was no one to tell you there was another option. Dumbledore looked at him with the look of someone encountering grace they didn't expect and aren't sure they deserve. There is another option, Harry said. We're going to use it. He paused. But when this is over, when Voldemort is dealt with and the Horcruxes are gone and I'm still alive, I need you to look at your methods. Actually look at them. The way you've run things, the way you've managed people, the way information gets controlled and choices get removed. Because what you did to me, you've done to other people. And some of them didn't have someone to come for them in a courtroom. The words sat in the room. In the fireplace, the flames moved. Fawkes, on his perch, regarded Dumbledore with the round, luminous attention of a creature that had been watching its person for a very long time. Dumbledore said, very quietly, "You're right. The cave expedition was planned for the last weekend of February." The week before it, Harry told Ron and Hermione everything, as promised, not just the plan but the shape of it, all of it, including the extraction method and what it meant and that it would work. Hermione sat with her hands folded on the table and her eyes very bright, which was how she looked when she was processing something that made her feel strongly and wasn't going to let it show until she'd processed it. "You're going to be all right," she said finally. "You are going to be all right. That's the plan. Plans change." "Not this one," Harry said, with the certainty he'd learned to have in the things Lucifer said when Lucifer said them without qualifications. "Not this one." Ron said nothing for a moment. "Then, when you come back, we're getting absolutely extravagant amounts of food from the kitchens. Just unreasonable quantities. To celebrate." "Deal," Harry said. They went on the Saturday, the three of them, Harry, Lucifer, Dumbledore. Mazikeen had been told and had expressed her opinion of the Enterprise in 3 words that suggested she found the entire situation insufficiently supervised, but she stayed in London because there were things she was tracking there, and because Lucifer had made the particular face that meant the conversation was over. They apparat to the coast, Harry with Lucifer, Dumbledore alone, and the coast was everything February coast should be, grey and cold, the sea hammering itself against the cliff face with the persistent anger of something that had been doing this for longer than anything nearby had existed. The sky was low and the wind was constant, the kind of wind that made you understand immediately why people didn't live on cliff edges. The cave entrance was hidden in the cliff face, accessible by a narrow path of wet stone, and the blood ward on the outer entrance was exactly what Harry had found in the library records, old, specific, requiring. Lucifer placed his hand against the rock and did something that Harry felt rather than saw, a deep vibration in the air, a quality of authority pressed against the magic, and the ward opened like a hand unclenching. Inside, the cave was worse. The lake in the cave was black, perfectly still, lit with a cold phosphorescence from the rock above, and the smell was old and wrong in the way of things preserved past their time. The island in the center was visible from the entrance, with a stone basin on it, and around it the water was. Harry looked at the water and felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The water wasn't still because it was calm. It was still because the things in it were waiting. Dumbledore's face, in the green light, was steady and practiced. He'd done this kind of thing before. "The basin," he said. "I see it," Lucifer said. The boat was enchanted to carry only one. This was, Harry thought, possibly the most overconfident magical security measure he'd encountered, designed to frustrate a human adult, an impediment to normal wizardry, completely ineffective against whatever Lucifer decided about the concept of carrying capacity. Lucifer looked at the boat. The boat looked back. The enchantment bent. They crossed in one boat. The basin held a potion, deep and glowing green, and in the basin at the bottom was the locket, small, heavy-looking, with a serpentine S on the front that Harry could read more easily than he wanted to. He could feel the Horcrux from where he was standing, the same cold, compressed malevolence as the diary, the same quality of a personality preserved in an object, furious and patient. Dumbledore began the work of extracting the locket, which required drinking the potion surrounding it. It was not something that could be avoided. Lucifer and Harry both examined the enchantment independently, from different angles, and arrived at the same conclusion: the potion had to be consumed, and it would inflict what it inflicted, and there was nothing to be done about that part. Dumbledore drank it without hesitation. That was the thing that struck Harry, standing there watching, the old man drinking something he knew would cause him serious harm, doing it without flinching, with the steadiness of someone who had made their peace with what was necessary a long time ago. The potion did what the potion did. Dumbledore was in agony by the third swallow, and Harry gave him water and held him and talked to him through it, because that was what there was to do, and the talking mattered even if all Harry was saying was "I'm here, keep going, just keep going." Lucifer stood at the edge of the island and watched the water. The infery came when the locket was removed. They came all at once, the lake surfacing with the slow horror of things that shouldn't move moving, pale arms and blank faces rising from the black water, the collective body of something long dead being directed by the residual enchantment toward the source of disturbance. Harry raised his wand. He'd been practicing offensive magic from Lucifer's books for 6 months, and what he cast was not a standard Hogwarts charm, it was a fire, a real one, conjured from intention and the specific protective fury that Lucifer had told him to stop suppressing and start using. The fire was white, not red, and it spread across the water in a wall between the island and the approaching dead, and the infery stopped. Behind him, Lucifer said something very quietly in a language Harry didn't know, and the water went still, and the infery sank, and the cave was silent. Harry stood with his wand out and the fire reflecting in the lake's surface and his heart going at speed, and thought, "I did that. That was mine." Dumbledore, on the ground behind him, said something that might have been well done. They got back across the lake. They got out of the cave. On the cliff edge in the February cold, with the sea still making its argument against the rocks below, Dumbledore sat on the stone and looked at the locket in his hands with the expression of someone who had just paid a significant price and was not entirely sure the cost was over. Lucifer produced a handkerchief from somewhere and handed it to Dumbledore with the matter-of-fact kindness Harry had come to recognize in him, never announced, never made into something, just given. 2 down, Harry said. 4 to go, Lucifer said. Dumbledore looked at him. You know the others. Nagini, the snake, is one, when the time comes. A cup at Gringotts, Hufflepuff's. A diadem, hidden in Hogwarts itself. A ring with a stone, already found and already, he paused, partially dealt with. He looked at the locket. The ring carried a curse. Albus. His voice was level. The curse reached its conclusion. You should know that. Dumbledore's hand went briefly to his right hand, something involuntary, quickly controlled. He looked at Lucifer with the look of a man who has been living with a truth and finds its naming a relief and a grief simultaneously. I had months, Dumbledore said. You had months, Lucifer agreed, without softening it and without making it worse. You still have some. They sat on the cliff for a while, the three of them, while the sea did its old work below. Harry looked at the sky, which was clearing slightly at the horizon, a strip of pale gold between the cloud base and the sea. He thought about the Horcruxes still out there and the fragment in his scar and the extraction method Lucifer had been building since August. He thought about what the mirror had shown him, not the future, not desire, but the present he already had. The people already in his life. "Albus," he said. Dumbledore looked at him. "When this is over," Harry said. "I want to know everything. All of it, in order, the whole story. My parents, what happened, what Voldemort was before he was Voldemort, the prophecy, all of it." He held the old man's gaze. "Not the version shaped to make me do what needs doing. The actual story." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "You deserve that." "I know I deserve it," Harry said, and the directness of it was gentle rather than sharp, because this was a man who was dying and who had been wrong and who had been alone with the wrongness for too long. "I'm telling you, I'd like you to be the one to tell me." Something moved in Dumbledore's face. Very slowly, it resolved into something that was not his public warmth, not the performed benevolence, but something older and more human, the face of a man who had been carrying something too long and was finding, for the first time, that it might be all right to set some of it down. "Yes," he said again, quietly. "I will." They apparat back to London. Dumbledore to Hogwarts. Harry and Lucifer to the penthouse. Mazikeen was in the kitchen when they arrived, and she looked at Harry in the way she looked at him after the roof sessions when he'd done something well, the brief, assessing, genuine approval. She didn't ask questions. She put food on the table. Lucifer went to the piano, which was what he did when he needed to process something, and Harry sat at the kitchen table and ate and listened to the music and felt the day settle into him. After a while, Lucifer stopped playing and came to the table and sat across from Harry with a glass of something, and they were quiet for a moment in the comfortable way of people who didn't need to fill the silence. "Dumbledore's dying," Harry said. "Yes." "The curse from the ring." "Yes." Harry sat with this. He'd known it since the cliff, since Lucifer had said you still have some, with the precision of someone giving an accurate number rather than a comfort. He'd known it before that, perhaps, had felt it in the meeting in the office, in the way the tiredness in Dumbledore's face was different from ordinary tiredness. The kind of tired that had a reason. "He should have told me about the plan," Harry said. "The one where I die." "Yes." "He should have told me about a lot of things." "Yes." "And he still, even knowing I know, even with everything that changed today, he still has plans he hasn't told me." "Yes," Lucifer said. "He probably always will. It's not malice. It's architecture. He thinks in structures, long ones, and the structures require components that don't know they're components." A pause. "You are not a component." "I know." "He's learning that. He's learning it at the end of his life, which is not the most convenient timing, but it's learning." Lucifer turned his glass slowly. "He's a good man who did things that good men shouldn't do, because he'd decided the outcome justified the process. He's been deciding that for 60 years and he's very good at it, and it has saved many people and cost many others. He's not simple. He shouldn't be understood simply." Harry looked at the table. "Do you like him?" Lucifer was quiet for a moment. "I respect him. In the specific way I respect anyone who has operated at the level he has, for as long as he has, driven by a genuine belief in something." A pause. "I disagree with his methods fundamentally and specifically. But disrespect and disagreement aren't the same thing." He looked at Harry. "Do you like him?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Yeah," he said. "I think I do." Which is complicated. Most things worth feeling are complicated. Is that a rule? An observation. One of the more reliable ones. Lucifer set down his glass. "How are you?" "Not the mission, not the locket, not the plan. You." Harry looked at his hands. He thought about the cave and the fire he'd called up from himself, white and real and his. He thought about talking Dumbledore through the potion, just being present, just talking. He thought about the mirror and what it had shown him in December, the people he already had, the life he was already living. "I'm good," he said. And then, because he was practicing honesty, "I'm scared sometimes. About the fragment, and what removing it means, and what happens if something goes wrong. I'm scared that people I care about are going to get hurt." He looked up. "But I'm not afraid of my life. I'm not afraid of what it's asking of me." He paused. "That's different from before." "Substantially," Lucifer agreed. "I couldn't have been here without the summer," Harry said. "I couldn't have been, any of this, without," he stopped, because the sentence was getting complicated and personal and he was still learning to let personal things be said out loud. "I know," Lucifer said simply. "You don't have to finish that." "I want to." Harry looked at him. "I made a wish in a cupboard when I was 7 years old and I didn't know I was making it, and it turned out to be the most important wish I ever made." He said it plainly and without performance. Not because of the contract, or the courtroom, or any of the logistics of it. Because it brought someone who actually, who asks. Who listens. Who tells me things. Who decided before they knew me that I wasn't dying on a technicality, and then decided it more firmly after. He looked at the table again. "I don't know exactly what the right word is. For what you are. To me. I am your guardian," Lucifer said. The word was simple and precise. In the full sense of what that means. Not a role, not a legal arrangement, not a contract. What it actually means. Harry nodded. He let it sit. After a while he went to the east bedroom and opened the window and sat at the desk with his notebook. He wrote for a long time: the cave, the inferi, the fire, the cliff, Dumbledore's face, the conversation in the kitchen. He wrote all of it down with the attention he gave things that he didn't want to lose. He wrote at the top of the page, February. He wrote 2 Horcruxes down. 4 to go, plus the fragment. The plan for the fragment is real and it will work and I believe that. He wrote, Dumbledore is dying. I don't know what to do with that except to be honest with him while there's time. He wrote, today I made fire. Real fire. From something in me that I've been carrying since I was born and never knew how to use. It was mine. I want to keep using it. He wrote, people I know are going to be in danger. The war isn't over. This year isn't over. But I am not afraid of the thing in my scar and I am not afraid of Voldemort and I am not going to spend the years between now and the end of this waiting to be used. He stopped. Read it back. Then wrote one more line. I am Harry Potter. I know what I am. I know who I have. I know what's coming. Let it come. He closed the notebook and looked out the east window. London in February was dark by 5 and it was past 7, the city lit in its 10 million ordinary ways, amber and white and blue. Somewhere north and east, Hogwarts sat in its highlands dark, old, and full of things still to be discovered. Somewhere a man in expensive robes kept something in a vault that needed finding. Somewhere a cave on a cliff held nothing but cold water now. He could hear the piano start again from the main room, something different this time, not the slow and complicated sadness of the processing music, but something that moved, something with momentum and light running through it. Harry stood up and went to the doorway and stood in the corridor and listened. He didn't know the piece. He'd been looking up classical pieces on one of the books from the library shelf. Lucifer had a shelf of musical theory that Harry had started reading with the same attention he gave the magical theory, because they felt like the same kind of thing, the same underlying grammar, and he didn't recognize this one specifically. But it was alive and going somewhere, and it filled the penthouse the way only something played by someone who genuinely needed to play could fill a room. Mazikeen was on the long couch with a book. She looked up at Harry standing in the corridor and then at the piano and then back at him, and she patted the couch next to her in the brief gesture of someone who didn't do that kind of thing often and was therefore making it mean something. Harry walked out and sat next to her, and the music kept going, and the stars came out above the ceiling, and London moved through its evening 10 stories below, and the three of them were in the same room and none of them needed it to be anything other than what it was. The next morning Harry wrote 2 letters. One to Ron and one to Hermione, each saying, "Still good. Still going. See you Sunday." Then he wrote to Dumbledore. "Short and direct, the story when you're ready. No rush. I'm not going anywhere." He sent them all with Hedwig and watched her disappear into the morning, white against the grey London sky, and thought about everything that was coming, the Horcruxes, the war, the extraction, the years between 12 and whatever age he'd be when this was finally finished, and found in himself something that was not naivete and not bravado but something more durably made than either. He was going to be all right. Not because the world was going to give him all right. Not because it had been promised or prophesied or planned for his benefit. But because he knew who he was and what he had and what he was willing to do, and because the wish a 7-year-old had made in the dark had turned out, improbably and completely, to be the right wish. The morning light came over the rooftops of London and through the east window and landed on the desk and the notebook in Harry's hands, and outside Hedwig was somewhere in it, flying toward people who were waiting to hear from him, and below the penthouse the city was alive with its 10 million stories, none of which knew his, all of which were happening anyway, the enormous ordinary world going on being itself regardless. He picked up his notebook. He opened a new page. He wrote at the top, "What comes next?" And then he started writing.